asked her as she opened the inner door to his office. It was as full of whirling gadgets and grumbling portraits as ever, and Holly smiled as she saw Fawkes, fully resplendent in his adult plumage, perched on his stand. "It is good to be back," Professor Holly said as she sat down in the comfy-looking armchair on the opposite side of his desk to him. Dumbledore had once been the Transfiguration Professor at Hogwarts, Holly remembered, and he could certainly conjure a good chair. "Good, good. While I do enjoy our conversations, I am afraid I shall have to continue our habit and discuss certain weighty matters rather than pleasant trivialities tonight," Dumbledore said. "At the end of last year, after I told you about Trelawney's prophecy, you said there were things I had to learn," Holly said, cautiously. "There are. First amongst them is something your godfather has been teaching you, occlumency. There are secrets, Holly, that Voldemort would kill to learn, or invade your mind to do so, were he to become aware of your connection," Dumbledore said. "I guess I've gotten pretty good at it, but getting good enough to stop Voldemort sounds like it'd take more than a summer," Holly said. "For anyone else, you would be quite right. Against Voldemort's direct gaze, or Merlin forbid a verbal casting of Legilimens, you would be as helpless as a newborn babe. The connection between you, however, is much more difficult for him to use. Time and space matter in magic, Holly, and distance alone is quite some protection. And, of course, you have the protection your mother's sacrifice gave you, so should you have even a basic mastery of occlumency, your mind will be quite secure from Voldemort," Dumbledore explained. "Couldn't he just get someone else to do it, sir?" Holly asked. "Ah, well, of course that is how you or I would solve such a conundrum. Voldemort, however, would not trust one of his followers with such a task. I am going to test your defenses now if that is acceptable to you." Dumbledore asked, and Holly nodded. He didn't, as Sirius had done, use his wand. He merely looked into her eyes with his own, and Holly felt a soft pressure against her mind. She emptied her thoughts and threw up barriers of incoherent false memories, throwing up new defenses even as the headmaster nimbly slipped around all of her efforts. He didn't batter through them, as a real dark wizard might have, only testing their strength and then slipping around them. Finally, he broke through her last defenses and then withdrew from her mind at once. A most excellent effort, for one summer's work. Even if he were at his full strength, Voldemort would be unable to read your memories through your connection. You mentioned dear Sybil's prophecy from last year. At the time, I mentioned that she had given 2 others. One of those was the cause of Voldemort's attack on you and your parents," Dumbledore said gravely. "What do you mean? Did it foretell something about them?" Holly asked, though something told her it was about more than that. Voldemort was passed an incomplete copy of it, by a spy in his employ. That was what motivated him to attack that Halloween night in Godric's Hollow. I should warn you, Holly, that this will not be an easy thing to hear. Are you sure you wish to hear it?" Dumbledore asked, his voice steady and serious. "I am," Holly said, without so much as a waver in her voice. With a wave of his hand, Dumbledore opened up a cabinet. Inside was a large stone basin, lines of tiny glowing Norse runes running all along the outside of it. "I have placed my memory of it in my pensieve, if you are sure," then Dumbledore said, and Holly gave him one final nod. He got up, and she followed. They walked over to the basin, and Dumbledore touched his wand to the liquid inside of it, which looked like nothing more than liquid moonlight. Dumbledore's wand glowed brightly for a second, and for a moment Holly found her eyes drawn to it. There was something familiar about it, but she could think no more about that strange sensation as a ghostly figure emerged from the pensieve. Professor Trelawney looked much the same as the professor Holly took divination classes from, though she was somewhat younger. She seemed to be formed out the strange, ethereal liquid in the basin, and she spoke in a voice Holly recognized, the voice of true prophecy. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark them as his equal, but they will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. So that's it, then. I have to what, fight him?" Holly asked. She didn't know what to feel, hearing the words. She thought she should be shocked, but something about the prophecy felt right, almost, to her. That it would come down to her and Voldemort seemed to make sense to her, on an instinctual level. Prophecy, Holly, is a tricky business. Whoever it is that weaves the threads of fate does not always get their way, and often enough they get it from those who hear the predictions they pass on. Lord Voldemort believes in that part of Sybil's prophecy he has heard, so he will not rest until he has killed you. If you had not heard it, would you be content not to fight him? Dumbledore asked. No, I guess I wouldn't, Holly said. While you are a most extraordinary young witch, I do not think you are destined to simply outduel Voldemort. Rather, there are two factors to consider. The first, and lesser, is that in failing to kill you that Halloween night, Voldemort passed along much of his powers to you. Indeed, it is now my belief that whatever magical skills and abilities he possessed that night, you would be capable of performing, Dumbledore said. But being able to cast whatever spells he could a decade ago isn't going to let me beat him, and I'm not sure I want to know some of them, Holly said. That is why I called it the lesser of the two. The greater factor is the power Voldemort knows not. I must confess I am still unsure as to what form this might take. I have considered several theories from the esoteric to the simple. Love, true companions, a spell he has simply overlooked. Whatever it is, however, I think that it will reveal itself in time, Dumbledore said. Love? Holly asked, skeptically. It has already been his ruin once, my dear girl. It protects you still, Dumbledore said. There was quiet for a moment, and then the silvery waters of Pensieve that had become Professor Trelawney collapsed back into the basin with a splash. We will cover much in this office, Holly. There are so many things I must teach you, so much you must learn. For tonight, I think this has been enough, Dumbledore said. Holly nodded, her feelings still oddly muted. She should have been shocked, terrified even by the words of the prophecy. Yet, all she could feel was the sense that her instinct had been right. She alone would face Voldemort, in the end. It was a ludicrous thing to consider. Holly was, she knew, very skilled for her age, but so had Tom Riddle been, and he had decades on her. I guess I'm glad I know about it, but I expected, Holly said. To learn some spell of incredible power. Dumbledore said, and she nodded. She felt silly saying it, and yet this had not been what she'd expected to learn when she'd walked into Dumbledore's office. I have every intention of teaching you magic, as well as secrets, but not, I think, in my office. I am rather fond of all my little gadgets and wonders, you see, Dumbledore said, and Holly laughed. I guess that makes sense, Professor. Thank you for telling me the truth about why everything happened, Holly said. I am not sure you should be thanking me for placing such a burden on you, Holly, Dumbledore said. It doesn't feel like a new burden. More like I have a name for an old one, Holly said. Indeed. Well, in any case, off to bed with you, Dumbledore said, and Holly got up. She waved goodbye to Fawkes, said goodnight to Dumbledore, and headed back to Gryffindor Tower. The idea of facing Voldemort was not another burden for her, but not being able to tell her friends about the prophecy was. Ron, Ginny, and Hermione cornered her after she returned, eager to know what Dumbledore had taught her. So, what did he teach you? Hermione asked. How to operate in Hogwarts, Ron suggested. Some really powerful spell was Ginny's suggestion. He just wanted to test my occlumency, and then told me some stuff, Holly said, and Hermione's eyes narrowed. Well, what did he tell you then? Ron asked. I can't tell you all of it. He told me about a prophecy Professor Trelawney made. About why Voldemort's after me, and other stuff, Holly said. What other stuff? Ginny asked. Holly paused, trying to think about what to say. She probably can't tell us, because someone could just pluck it from our mind, Hermione said, her eyes widening. Holly nodded. Blimey, people can do that? Ron asked. There are ways to stop it, but they are hard to learn, and you'd have to be really good to keep out the people who'd want to, Holly said. The prophecy lingered in Holly's mind that night, and she woke several times from old nightmares filled with a woman screaming and flashes of bright green light. Each time, her heart pounding, she grabbed her wand from her hiding place only to recognize her surroundings and relax. Potions in the morning certainly didn't help her mood, although Snape was continuing his policy of ignoring Holly. She was growing more and more confused about the potions professor, especially after seeing his Patronus. He was still just as awful to all the other Gryffindors, but when Holly handed in her potion at the end of the class, he merely gave her her grade, an E, without speaking. She walked into the restricted section and made her notes on Legilimency in the light of day, the librarian not even asking for her pass anymore. A few people gave her a look as she entered the gated section of the library, but her fame worked to her advantage here. Holly realized right away that she would need to practice on someone if she hoped to become a Legilimens, and something clicked in her mind. Her friends would probably benefit from learning Occlumency, after all. On Thursday, everyone arrived early to the defense classroom before lunch had even ended. They were all excited to learn from Mad-Eye Moody, a man whose reputation had spread through the school like wildfire. People told wild stories about him battling Death Eaters, and once having dueled Voldemort and survived. Holly heard him arrive, his discordant gait easily recognizable through the noise of the school corridors. Moody merely seemed to be slightly amused at their early arrival and grinned as he entered the classroom. "You won't need those today," he said, pointing at the copies of The Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection everyone had out. Excited whispers ran through the room like a bolt of lightning. "You lot have had a mixed bag when it comes to defense. Quirrell and Lockhart were both useless, but Lupin managed to salvage something from you, at least. I'm here for 1 year as a favor to Dumbledore, because he's seen the storm clouds on the horizon and wants you all to be ready. So forget the ministry-approved curriculum of me hinting at dark spells and teaching you counter curses more likely to amuse your enemy than incapacitate them. I'm going to teach you one thing and one thing only, how to defend yourselves from what's out there. Now, if you'll put that magazine under your desk away, Miss Brown, let's get started," Moody said, and Holly grinned. It sounded like Mad-Eye Moody would live up this reputation. Chapter 45, Year 4, Chapter 11. Chapter Text. The Ministry has a lot of opinions on how I should be teaching you to defend yourselves. I'm not supposed to show you real dark curses until you're doing your NEWTs, because dark wizards will only try to curse people who get an E on their Ls. Dumbledore thinks that's complete crap, and so do I, Moody said, grinning at the shocked faces of most of the class. A real dark wizard isn't going to lecture you about the curse he's going to hit you with, is he? Not going to give you a nice little explanation before he blows your innards out or makes you leap off a bridge. Still, I'm sure some of you know a little something about curses. There are always a few in every year, rumors, a little extracurricular reading. Moody's glass eye darted to Holly for just a moment and held her gaze, before turning away from her. Or a little homeschooling. So, can any of you tell me what curses are most punishable under wizarding law? Moody asked, pacing back and forth in front of the blackboard. Slowly, cautiously, Hermione raised her hand. Everyone seemed to turn and look at her. "The unforgivable curses," Professor Hermione said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Excellent, Granger. You're exactly right, of course. I'm sure some of you know about one of them," Moody said, casting his gaze around the classroom. Holly, of course, knew about all three. Her hand remained by her side, however. I know about one, Professor. Well, my dad told me about it," Ron said, his hand pointed tentatively in the air. Moody's eyes, both artificial and natural, swirled around to gaze at Ron. "Oh, your father would know." "Which one, Weasley?" Moody asked. The Imperious Curse, Professor. "The mind control curse," Ron said. "Gave the Ministry a lot of trouble after Voldemort met his end, that one did. Makes the victim believe that whatever they'd done was their own idea, so that they'll even say they came up with the idea under a truth potion. Nasty business, separating out those who really was under control, and those with the money to buy enough character witnesses," Moody said, laughing bitterly. He took out a large jar from underneath his desk, which contained 3 large black spiders. Moody placed it on his desk, opened it up, and withdrew one spider almost gently. "Now, any one of the 3 spells we're going to discuss today carries an automatic life sentence for use on a human being, but spiders are another matter. Imperio," Moody said, pointing his wand at the spider. There was a faint haze in the air, and then the spider started to move. It danced in the air on a thread of webbing, displaying more grace than Holly had ever seen a spider possess. "I could make it do whatever I wanted, dance like it had spent years learning the ballet, bite a student putting gum under his desk," Moody said, keeping his wand pointed at the spider. It landed on Seamus's head, but after a moment it jumped off to a chorus of laughter. Or even throw itself out a window, Moody said, and as the spider seemed to hover just an inch from falling through the open window, all the laughter ceased. Not so funny after all, eh? Should I make it do another little dance, or perhaps chide one of you with it sitting on your head? No. It's not so easy to do to another wizard, but being able to throw off an imperious curse is a skill you either have or you don't. Best not to be hit in the first place, which means constant vigilance, Moody shouted, making half the class jump. Holly felt her hand instinctively go for her wand, but she forced herself to relax. Anybody else? Moody asked. Hermione still had her hand up, and to Holly's surprise so did Neville. He looked nervous but oddly determined. It wasn't an expression Holly saw on his face often, but it was unmistakable. Moody looked at him and paused for a moment. He looked between Hermione and Neville and then turned to Neville. Yes, Longbottom. Moody said. The Cruciatus curse, Sir Neville said, his gaze not wavering from Moody's. You would know that one. We'll need a bigger spider for the demonstration to really take hold. Engorgio. Moody said as he plucked another spider out of the jar and placed it on the desk. It grew with a disgusting stretching noise until it was the size of a small dog. Crucio, Moody said, his voice level and seemingly empty of all emotion. Holly saw the beam of red light strike the spider, but she didn't hear its distressed clicking and chittering. She heard her own scream and high, cruel laughter. She remembered what it felt like to have every nerve in her body burn, her hands shaking under her desk. Neville seemed almost on the verge of tears, but he didn't look away. He gripped the desk with white-knuckled hands, his eyes wide. Moody once more caught Neville's gaze and stopped the spell. Pain. Nothing more, nothing less. No thumbscrews or knives needed. That leaves only the last of them, if you could inform the rest of us, Miss Granger. Moody said. He took out one last spider and put it on the desk, where it seemed to stand stock still. Avada Kedavra, Hermione said, not looking at Moody. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. The killing curse. The last, and the worst, Moody said, and he raised his wand. Holly felt something, an alien and cold sensation touch her mind ever so briefly, and then Moody spoke once more. Avada Kedavra, he shouted, and a rush of bright green light struck the spider, which died without so much as a scared chitter. Holly recognized the light, of course. Some had cast it at her during the attack on the World Cup. But she had known it far longer than that. She had dreamt of it for as long as she could remember, dreamt of high, mocking laughter and a flash of green light. She thought of her parents, lying as still and unblemished as the spider on the desk. Holly shivered and tried to ignore the whispers. There is no counter-curse, no shielding from it. Only one person has survived its touch, and she's sitting in this class, Moody said. Everyone turned to look at Holly, and she responded by looking straight ahead. Now, the killing curse requires an uncommon amount of power and focus. Even Voldemort can't cast it without an incantation, and the wand movement's complicated. A physical barrier will protect you, and so will not getting hit in the first place. So you need to practice constant vigilance because, without it, you are going to get hit by this when a dark wizard comes calling, Moody shouted. The rest of Moody's lesson was less dramatic theory and legal background to the unforgivable curses, and Holly had to resolve to copy Hermione's notes after class. Her own hand was still shaking too badly to write with, without the adrenaline of a life-or-death situation to steady it. Neville seemed to be about as distracted, but at least he was able to release his vice grip on his desk and copy down the notes. That was wicked. The way he just, Ron whispered as they left the classroom. That seemed, to Holly, to be the general sentiment of the class. Hermione didn't look as excited, and Holly could see that Neville was still a little out of it. What had all that been about, she wondered. Really, Ron? Hermione said. What, he said. Holly turned away from her two friends' argument and looked at Neville. You okay, Neville, she asked. I'm fine. Just a really interesting lesson, do you know what's for dinner? Neville asked, and Holly blinked. She had been about to respond when she heard Moody's uneven gait behind her, the discordant step clunk distinctive enough to cut through the noise of the corridor. You did well in there, Longbottom. I can see why the hat put you in with the lions. Come with me, we'll have a cup of tea, Moody said, his growl almost soft. He put a hand on Neville's shoulder, and as the two of them turned away Moody looked at Holly for just a moment. You all right, Potter? I'm fine, she said, glad her hands had stopped shaking. She didn't want Moody's pity. I'm sure you are. It might seem harsh, the way I teach, but you've got to know. No use pretending. Come along, Longbottom, Moody said, and then he and Neville walked away. What was that all about? Ron asked as Holly rejoined her friends. I don't know, really. Moody seemed. I'm not sure what to make of him, Holly said. I suppose he's used to teaching our trainees, not children. At least he does seem to know what he's doing, unlike some of our previous defense professors, Hermione said with a sigh. Holly and Ron politely did not bring up Lockhart, although the two of them shared a look. I know I wouldn't want to have to end up dueling this one, Holly said, and all three of them laughed. Holly, you know how to get down into the kitchens, right? Hermione asked her as they walked back to Gryffindor Tower. Yeah, it's on the map. Do you want me to show you how to get in? Holly asked. I've been reading about house elves, but all the books are written by wizards. Could you introduce me to Dobby? She asked. Sure, I've been meaning to go say hello to him anyway, Holly said. You two have fun with that, I've gotta go finish up the divination homework, Ron said. Holly and Hermione walked all the way down the staircase again, and Holly showed Hermione how to tickle just the right pair to get into the kitchens. The Hogwarts kitchen seemed to be an exact, underground mirror of the Great Hall. The same 5 tables occupied the same positions, except that there were no chairs or anything on them. Ovens and stoves lined the walls, all wood-fired, and great ruined vents in the ceiling drew out the smoke. Dozens of house elves moved around the kitchens with manic energy, getting dinner-ready tools that looked ludicrously oversized. Miss Holly Potter! Dobby shouted, and that attracted the attention of all the rest of the house elves. Several of them joined Dobby in rushing towards Holly and Hermione. Hello, Dobby. Do you remember Hermione? Holly asked. Oh, Dobby remembers Miss Hermione Granger very well. Dobby is very glad you came to visit, Miss Holly Potter, he said, smiling warmly. Is it all right if I ask you some questions, Dobby? Only I've been trying to read about house elves, but all the books are written by really horrible pureblood wizards, Hermione said. The elves that had joined Dobby made knowing sounds of agreement. Of course. Dobby is happy to help Miss Hermione learn. What is you wanting to know, miss? Dobby said. Well, I don't understand why house elves need to bond with wizards. The books make it sound like you have to be enslaved, but you and the rest of the Hogwarts elves can still do elf magic just fine, Hermione said. That is because we are bonded by contract, Miss Hermione. Elves like to work, and bonds with witches and wizards is how we get our magic, but we only need an agreement for that. Long ago, bad wizards used that magic to make elves do whatever they wanted. Wizards not be liking when there is magic they can't control, miss. It is why they put all the dragons on 2 preserves and put iron bars on all the ways to other places, Dobby said. Holly had never heard that before, but it made sense. Dobby had just as much power when Dumbledore was paying him to watch over Holly as when he'd been working for the Malfoys. What do the Hogwarts elves get, if you don't mind me asking? Hermione said. Each elf gets different things, Miss Hermione. Dobby likes to buy things for himself and his friends, so Dobby is paid in wizard gold. Some elves only be wanting a token gift, so they ask the professor for brandy or biscuits. One elf is very strange indeed and is being paid in shiny muggle paper, Dobby explained. He and Hermione talked for nearly half an hour, whilst Holly played with a few tiny little elves who had to be their equivalents of children. They all seemed very happy to see her, though they shooed Holly and Hermione out when they began preparing dinner in earnest. Thank you for showing me that, Holly, Hermione said. I didn't know most of that, either, she said, as she and Hermione walked back up to Gryffindor Tower. Chapter 46, Year 4, Chapter 12. Chapter Text. That Friday afternoon, Holly walked down to the Quidditch pitch in her red and gold Quidditch robes. Angelina Johnson was the new Gryffindor captain, and she was holding tryouts for keeper and for reserve chasers. There was a large crowd of kids with brooms all gathered on the pitch, and Holly joined her teammates standing opposite them. Right. We'll be holding tryouts for keeper and reserve chasers today. No use changing up our chaser squad, and if you think you're gonna be better than Potter or the Weasley twins, Angelina said, to general laughter from the crowd. Holly made sure to cheer for Ron when it was his turn to try and block the quaffle, and she was delighted when he clearly beat Cormac McLagan for the keeper's spot. Ginny made reserve chaser and reserve seeker, so when they returned to Gryffindor Tower, they were in a celebratory mood. You were brilliant, Ron, Holly said. Couldn't let McLagan onto the team, could I? You or Angie would have hexed him off his broom within a week, Ron said. Hermione, who had been watching from the stands, laughed. Quite true, Ickle Ronnikins, Fred said. Ron was, of course, taller than the twins by now. He towered over Holly, Hermione, and Ginny, especially Holly. We'll be sure to tell your new captain how devoted to keeping her out of trouble you are, George said, and Ron rolled his eyes. Shove off, he said. That night, Holly, Ginny, Hermione, and Ron all returned to Holly's hidden potions laboratory in a disused secret passage. They were too big to all use her cloak, so Holly let her friends use it whilst she flew there transformed into a raven. She relished soaring through the corridors, using her phenomenal agility to take sharp turns at great speed. She transformed back into herself just in front of the secret passage, looked both ways to make sure no one was around, and joined her friends inside. This place is wicked, Holly, Ginny said. Yeah, you've got a full lab going on in here, mate, Ron said. You have made sure it's properly ventilated, right? Hermione said. So long as we only use one cauldron at a time, we should be fine. Anyway, I already have the sticking collusion ready, Holly said. I still can't believe this is how you become an animagus. It sounds like the sort of fake spell Fred and George would teach you as a laugh, Ron said. It's not what I expected either, but it really does work. Are you all sure you want to do this? Holly asked. Everyone nodded, and they all dunked their mandrake leaves in the sticking solution. That feels very odd. Are you sure your arithmetics is good, Holly? Ginny asked. I'm sure. Hermione double-checked it for me, Holly said. That was, at least for the students of Gryffindor Tower, as good as it got. It was some very nice prognostication, Holly. Although you need to show more of your work, Hermione said. She's not handing it in for homework, Hermione, Ron said, shaking his head. Hermione blushed. Over the next few weeks, Holly's classes were harder than they had ever been at Hogwarts. Every teacher stressed that their owls were next year. Owls, or ordinary wizarding levels, were a big deal. Even Ron had been driven to study, at least a little. Holly's lessons with Dumbledore, which took place around once a week, mostly concentrated on teaching her to defend her own mind. Dumbledore taught her much more advanced techniques than Sirius had been able to. Moody's defense against the Dark Arts class was a standout in difficulty. Unlike Lupin, he did believe in essay writing and reading, but his lessons still had a huge practical component. Moody had them practice dodging little colored jets of light that left glowing stains behind, keeping their aim when he was casting stinging jinxes at them, and started drilling them on the shield charm a year early. At the end of that lesson, he announced that in their next lesson, they'd be learning how to fight off the Imperius Curse. Rumors circled around the school because just about every defense class in the third year and up had been told the same thing. Holly's class, as a result of their somewhat unusual timetable for defense, were up first. People filed into the defense classroom, nervously looking around. Moody sometimes liked to stage impromptu tests by jumping out of a hiding place and hexing people. He was standing out in the open at the front of the classroom, however, so that was a good sign. Before Holly could sit down, Moody had cleared the desks and chairs away with a wave of his wand. They stacked themselves neatly against the sides of the classroom, and Moody grinned as people milled about in the center of the room. Legally, neither I nor the school can make you take this lesson. You can walk out that door without losing anything related to your grades, but you'll never know if you could do it, Moody said. Do what? Seamus Finnegan asked, looking very nervous. Resist the Imperius Curse. What did you think we were doing today, Finnegan? Moody said. Isn't that, well, illegal, Professor? Hermione asked. Usually. But how else do you think we ensure dark wizards can't control the errors? But, Miss Granger, if you don't want to learn this, you're free to leave, Moody said. Hermione gulped, but she stayed where she was. No one else wanted to object, and there was definitely no one who wanted to look weak by leaving. One by one, the class was called up to the front and put under Moody's control. Neville did gymnastics that he would clearly never have been able to do without the curse. Lavender stood up and talked about how divination was rubbish. Moody wasn't able to get Hermione to suggest skipping class, but she wasn't able to fully break out of his control, either. Then it was Holly's turn. She walked forward and emptied her mind. She prepared all the occlumency she'd been taught, turning her mind into a maze of traps and dead ends. She felt someone brush against her mind, not trying to get in, merely inspecting her defenses. Potter, the point is to try and resist the curse once it's on you. Dark wizards won't always give you the time to raise defenses like that, Moody said, but Holly could hear that he was impressed by her occlumency. Sorry, Professor, Holly said, and let her mental defenses drop. Moody gave her a nod, and then he pointed his wand at her. Imperio, he said, calmly, and Holly felt a bizarre sensation wash over her. She felt utterly peaceful, like all her worries had simply been washed away. She tried to think of her troubles, but they seemed to disappear whenever she focused on them. She felt a brief moment of frustration, but it disappeared beneath the sea of bland happiness she felt in an instant. Jump on the desk, she heard in Moody's voice. It sounded like a whisper and something heard a great distance all at once. Holly didn't really want to jump on the desk, it sounded like a lot of effort, to her. She heard Moody repeat the instruction, and this time she felt something other than bland happiness. With just that tiny foothold, she was able to focus her mind. The haze disappeared with a faint snapping sound, and she was herself again. Ha! I knew you'd do it, Potter. They won't be controlling you, that's for damn sure, Moody said. That afternoon, as Holly and her friends were walking back from Care of Magical Creatures, they saw a huge crowd gathered in the entrance hall. Students of all ages and houses were jostling for position, and Holly knew she'd never get a look past all the tall 7th years who had managed to elbow their way to the front. Ron, what's going on? Holly asked, and her lanky friend tried to see over the crowd. Something on the notice board, I think, Ron said. All right, you lot. If you've already read it, get a move on and let everybody else through, Hagrid said, upon seeing the crowd as he walked through the entrance hall. Eventually, Holly was able to read the notice that had caused all the excitement. Triwizard Tournament. The delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will be arriving at 6 o'clock on Friday the 30th of October. Lessons will end half an hour early. Students will return their bags and books to their dormitories and assemble in front of the castle to greet our guests before the welcoming feast. All Quidditch teams are to finalize their rosters with their heads of house, as the first game, Slytherin vs Beauxbatons, will take place on Saturday the 31st. Also taking place on that day is the first-year round of the dueling competition. First-year students wishing to compete should register with their head of house. Potions ending half an hour early. I think I'm gonna enjoy this tournament thing, Ron said. Oh, that's interesting. I imagine the dueling competition is based on the Durmstrang one, Hermione said. Holly blinked. What do you mean? Holly said. She'd only heard a few nasty rumors about Durmstrang. It's famous, 6 of the last 10 European dueling champions have won it when they were at school. Though I imagine they'll be making a few rules changes, anyway. The way it works is that each year level has a separate knockout tournament, with the winner of each previous year level going on to the next year level's tournament, Hermione explained. Blimey, Holly. You could probably clean up at something like that, Ron said. I wonder when the 4th year one will be. It sounds like it could be fun. I am kind of excited to see Slytherin get flattened by Beauxbatons, though, Holly said. Now that sounds like a real laugh, Ron said. The entire school talked about one thing and one thing only that week, the Triwizard Tournament. People talked about what the tasks would be, who would try and become Hogwarts champion, and what the students from the other schools would be like. The teachers had transformed the school, putting every effort into making sure all the suits of armor were polished and squeak-free. Holly only narrowly avoided a detention for her shoes not being polished enough, and she laughed as she saw Daphne Greengrass get one for her skirt being too short. She had to duck into a secret passage as McGonagall turned around, however, because her shirt was definitely not tucked in and her tie was loose. On the morning of the other school's arrival, Holly saw that the Great Hall had been redecorated. Huge silk banners, one for each house and one for Hogwarts itself, hung from the walls. On either side of the Hogwarts banner were two still furled up banners of equal size. Holly could guess that they bore the crests of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons. Extra seating had been added to the Quidditch pitch, and half of it was done up in the pale blue and gold of Beauxbatons' colours. The sense of excitement that had been building all week reached a fever pitch that morning, and everyone seemed to be waiting for classes to finish. Even Hermione looked restless in History of Magic, a class she usually prized as essential homework time. When Snape begrudgingly let them go half an hour early, Holly and all her classmates rushed to their dorms to put their things away and get their cloaks. Ginny joined Holly, Ron, and Hermione, and the four of them headed downstairs in a hurry. They joined the sea of black-cloaked students walking through the entrance hall, and everyone seemed to have heard a different story for how the students from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons were arriving. Cormac McLaggen claimed that the Durmstrang students would be arriving on Dragonback, whilst Lee Jordan said that the Ministry had made hundreds of portkeys to support the tournament. As Holly joined the rest of the students in lining up outside the castle, she felt pretty sure that nobody would be arriving on Dragonback. But, Holly thought, that would be really cool. Chapter 47, Year 4, Chapter 13. Chapter Text. I think I see something. Little Dennis Creevy said, pointing up into the dark sky. Holly's eyes snapped up, along with everyone else in the crowd, and she thought she saw something moving between the dark clouds. Well spotted, Mr. Creevy. 5 points to Gryffindor. I do believe our guests from Beauxbatons have arrived first, Dumbledore said, and even as he spoke the distant shape got closer and closer. Excited whispers rippled through the crowd, nobody quite realizing what the shape was. Many people had to have it pointed out to them, but Holly thought she had a good idea of what it was, now. Evidently, the Beauxbatons students were going to arrive in a carriage pulled by flying horses. Perhaps, Holly thought, it would be bigger on the inside. That sounded like the kind of thing wizards would do. Then the carriage got closer, and Holly realized her estimate of the carriage size had been way off. Each of the dozen horses pulling the carriage was the size of an elephant, their wings beating with tremendous power. They were all the same light blonde color, which Holly was sure there was a fancy word for that she didn't know, and their reins seemed to be made from a golden thread. The carriage itself was the size of a small house and was painted a pale blue, with numerous golden accents and decorations. The largest of these was the two crossed wands of Beauxbatons' coat of arms, which Holly thought must each be taller than her. There were windows on the side of the carriage giving away its true size, and they glowed with soft orange light as the carriage came into land. The winged horses managed an impressively soft landing, seemingly without any human intervention. They walked gracefully along the ground until the gigantic carriage sat just opposite the crowd of Hogwarts students. A door, which despite being about 12 feet tall looked comically undersized, opened. A single boy in a uniform of pale blue silk jumped down and unfolded a set of golden steps. The first person down the steps was a woman as tall as Hagrid, but with all the elegance and grace Holly's friend lacked. The black satin of her dress, combined with a fortune in opals, added to Holly's impression of the olive-skinned woman. The golden steps, despite looking as fragile as an antique chair, took even the truly titanic woman's weight without so much as a groan. Following her were two more adults, a witch and a wizard. The wizard wore finely made, if conventional, robes in a dark green color. He had a head full of slicked back brown hair, and a finely trimmed beard of the same color. The witch wore dark leathers that Holly thought might have been dragon hide and had stark white hair despite her face looking young and vibrant. Her eyes were a distinctive yellow, and Holly thought she was very good looking. Not pretty, maybe, but handsome. Then came the students, who all wore uniforms of pale blue silk that seemed much too light for the climate of Hogwarts. There were three distinct groupings of students that emerged from the carriage. 1. The first to emerge, consisted of about a dozen boys and girls in their late teens. Holly quickly identified these as the prospective champions. Then came roughly a dozen first-year students, looking very cold and apprehensive as they joined their older fellows in lining up outside the castle. Last of all came a group of 7 students, more mixed in age. These, Holly knew, must be one of the Beauxbatons teams competing in the Quidditch Cup this year. Dumbledore walked forward and kissed the very tall woman's hand. "My dear Madame Maxime, welcome to Hogwarts," Dumbledore said, genuine warmth in his voice. "It is good to see you, Dumbledore. It has been too long since we have spoken face to face. But I must introduce my teachers to you. Ms. Dumont, one of our defense teachers, and Mr. Garnier, our head of transfiguration," Madame Maxime said, her French accent thick but understandable. "A pleasure. I have quite enjoyed your articles on the mathematical limits of conjuration spells, Mr. Garnier," Dumbledore said. Holly saw the Beauxbatons transfiguration teacher blush, clearly pleased that Dumbledore had so much as heard of him. The defense teacher just smiled, her expression unreadable. "Has Karkaroff arrived yet, Dumbledore?" Madame Maxime asked. I believe he is due promptly. Would you like to wait, or head on inside?" Dumbledore asked, but before Madame Maxime could answer, waves began to disturb the surface of the Black Lake. Everyone turned to look, and Holly saw the very tip of a mast emerge from the waters of the lake. "It's a ship," Holly said excitedly to her friends, and indeed the top of the mast was followed by a great black sail and then a forest of rigging. More sails joined it above the surface, and then all at once the rest of the ship surged up from the Black Lake. It was like something from a movie, Holly thought, a huge sailing ship with cannon ports and made entirely from black wood. Its sails bore Durmstrang's crest, a huge double-headed eagle in red. The whole ship had an eerie look about it, as if it had been raised from its resting place on the ocean floor. People began to disembark, and as the delegation from Durmstrang approached, everyone noticed one student in particular. Holly had only seen him up close in person once, in the Minister's box after the Quidditch World Cup, but she recognized Viktor Krum on sight. He looked less graceful off a broom, his gait odd and slow, but there he was. The youngest seeker in the international competition, here at Hogwarts. Holly felt a sudden sense of dread. Would he fly for one of the Durmstrang Quidditch teams? She thought she was pretty good, but she knew she'd have no chance against someone like Krum. She could only hope that his status as a professional player would prevent him from risking injury in school games. Somehow, though, she didn't think Viktor Krum would let that stop him. "I had no idea he was still in school," Ginny said, her voice awestruck. "No offense, Holly, but I really hope we don't have to fly against him," Ron said. "None taken. He'd flatten us in 10 minutes," Holly said. "He's only a Quidditch player." "I don't see what all the fuss is about," Hermione said. "Only a Quidditch player? Hermione, he's the best seeker in the world." "Blimey, I bet every girl in the castle will take a shot at him," Ron said. "I don't see why," Hermione said primly. "You don't see why some people would be attracted to a handsome, fabulously wealthy, international celebrity?" Holly asked. "Do Quidditch players make that much money?" "I can't see how the wizarding economy could support it," Hermione said. "Lots of really rich blokes own all the clubs, and I think they make most of their money from stuff they still own in the Muggle world. It's a vanity thing, really," Ron explained as everyone made their way back into the castle. The Durmstrang students, in their heavy furs, looked like they were much more suited to the climate than the Beauxbatons students. Igor Karkaroff, the Durmstrang headmaster, was talking with Madame Maxime and Dumbledore as they walked back to the castle. 2 Durmstrang teachers, both women, had arrived with the students, and they seemed to be talking to the 2 Beauxbatons teachers and Professor McGonagall. As they returned to the Great Hall, the Durmstrang students took seats on the Slytherin table whilst the Beauxbatons students sat with the Ravenclaws. The visiting teachers took seats on the staff table, whilst the 2 headmasters sat on either side of Dumbledore. There were 2 more guests on the staff table that night. One was Ludo Bagman, looking a little less carefree than when Holly had last seen him, whilst the other was a slightly frazzled-looking witch Holly had never seen before. A silence fell over the Great Hall as the last students took their seats, everyone looking to Dumbledore. He smiled, and stood up. "Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, ghosts, and all others, but most of all, to our guests this fine evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to Hogwarts, and I hope that you enjoy your stay. The tournament will be opened at the end of the feast, so let us all eat, drink, make ourselves at home before we begin such serious matters," Dumbledore said, to general applause. One of the Bosbaton students, a girl, gave a snort of derisive laughter. "Nobody made you come," Hermione said under her breath, as plates and platters filled with food as usual. What foods appeared, however, was very unusual. Holly recognized most of it, having been read most of Aunt Petunia's recipe books out of boredom before she came to Hogwarts, but she thought most of the students, especially the purebloods, would find much of it strange. She ladled herself some beef bourguignon and mashed potatoes and saw Ron looking at all the strange new foods a bit apprehensively. She was sure some of the dishes meant to represent Durmstrang might be a bit strange to him, and she recognized only a few of them. Even Hermione, who had been to most of Europe with her parents, seemed a bit puzzled at some of them. "Try this, Ron, you'll like it," Holly said, pointing to the rich beef stew she'd just ladled onto her plate. He got some, a little cautiously, but smiled as soon as he ate a bite. "This stuff's pretty good." "How do you know about French food and stuff?" Ron asked. "Aunt Petunia had books upon books about it, and never cooked any of it because my uncle thought it was too foreign," Holly said. "Excuse me, but could you pass the bouillabaisse?" a girl with a light French accent asked, and Holly turned around in her seat to see who had spoken. She was a Bosbaton student, but looking at her up close Holly could see that she was stunningly beautiful. Her silvery blonde hair seemed to sparkle in the candlelight, and her face was almost too symmetrical. "Oh, of course," Hermione said, unaffected by what Holly was sure was a lesser type of Veela's aura. Maybe the girl was only part Veela. Hermione passed her the bowl of fish and broth, rolling her eyes at the reaction of her friends. "I'm telling you, that girl's a Veela," Ron said, after she'd gone back to the Ravenclaw table and was thus safely out of earshot in the noisy Great Hall. "Really, Ronald?" Hermione said. "I think he's right, Hermione. Not a full Veela, though," Holly said, and Hermione simply rolled her eyes. "That girl looked like she'd just stepped off the front cover of Witch Weekly," Hermione Ginny said. "She did seem a little airbrushed," Holly said. After everyone had eaten their fill, and the golden plates had been wiped clean by the magic of the house elves, tension began to fill the room. People began to whisper and look around, and Holly heard whispers all around her. Dumbledore let them stew for a moment before he stood up once more. "The time has come. Mr. Filch, prepare the casket. The Triwizard Tournament is about to start, and while I'm sure we are all very excited, there are a few things that must be clarified first. Before that, let me introduce Mr. Ludo Bagman and Mrs. Janet Hull, heads of the Department of Magical Games and Sports and International Magical Cooperation, respectively," Dumbledore said. Mr. Bagman got much more applause than Mrs. Hull, probably because he had once been a very good beater for the English national Quidditch team. They have worked tirelessly to bring this new, modern form of the Triwizard Tournament to life. It is Mr. Bagman, in particular, we have to thank for the new events. Both of them will be joining myself, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime as judges for the efforts of the champions in the 3 tasks of the tournament," Dumbledore said, and at the mention of the word champions the entire hall seemed to go silent. Dumbledore smiled at that and waved Filch in. Filch pushed a large wooden cart into the Great Hall. On it was a tall wooden chest, encrusted with gemstones and glowing silver runes. Everyone simply stared silently at it as Filch wheeled it up past the students. "Each task has been reviewed by Mr. Bagman and Mrs. Hull, and then approved by each headmaster. There will be 3 tasks spread throughout the school year, each of which will have several events beforehand. These events will allow all students of a competing school to contribute to the success of their champion. What aid victory in these events grants will not be known until the task itself, but their nature will give something of a clue. This aid will only go so far. A champion must be able to rely on their wits, their cunning, and most of all their bravery. All of these and more will be tested," Dumbledore said, and what few whispers broke out seemed to fall entirely silent. Holly would have sworn she couldn't hear anyone so much as breathe. Each school will have one champion, chose by an impartial magical judge, the Goblet of Fire. As Dumbledore spoke, he tapped the chest with his wand. It seemed to become translucent for a moment, and Dumbledore withdrew a plain-looking wooden cup from within it. He set the cup down, and after each headmaster tapped it with their wand, blue-white flames roared to life in it. Aspiring champions have 24 hours to place their names in the goblet. A strip of parchment will suffice. At this time on Halloween night, the goblet will select 3 champions, and then go out for another 3 years. I will be drawing an age line to prevent any underage students from entering their names, though the goblet will otherwise be freely accessible, Dumbledore said, and Holly saw that the Weasley twins had a mischievous gleam in their eyes. She shook her head, sure that their plan would be a failure. To be chosen by the Goblet of Fire as a champion is, I warn you, a binding magical contract. There can be no withdrawal, no second thoughts if you are chosen. I therefore ask you to think seriously before entering your name, and warn those who are not of age that you will not be able to enter your name. You will have other chances to participate, but the dangers of the tasks are too great for any but adult wizards and witches. Now, off to bed with you all, Dumbledore said. That night, Holly looked to her trunk, thinking of her invisibility cloak. She had a half-dozen ideas to get her name in the goblet, and a part of her wanted to enter. Her more sensible side won out, though, and she instead decided to stay up with the Marauders map. Watching who put names into the goblet would be entertaining enough, she thought. Chapter 48, Year 4, Chapter 14. Chapter Text. Holly watched the little names wander into the great hall one by one, laughing to herself every now and then. She saw quite a few students who were definitely not of age get thrown back from the goblet, so she thought that Dumbledore's age line had worked. She also saw what she was fairly certain was a much smarter method of trying to get a name in, having a house elf drop it in. At least, that's what she thought seeing names like Creature and Hilly meant. She was distracted for a moment as she saw Dobby off cleaning something on the map, and when Holly looked back to the Great Hall she saw Karkaroff enter. Was there a rule against a headmaster entering students' names, Holly wondered. Then the defense teacher from Beauxbatons entered the Great Hall, approached the goblet, and left. Holly rolled her eyes, at least Karkaroff had gone himself, and whispered the password to close the map. She hid it carefully amongst her things, blew out the candle on her bedside table, and went to sleep after seeing that. The next morning was a Saturday, so Holly would usually have breakfast fairly late after a bit of a lie-in if she didn't have Quidditch practice. She, Hermione, Ginny, and Ron weren't alone in heading down to the Great Hall early, however. Plenty of people gathered around to watch people try and put their names into the goblet. The Great Hall was already full of Halloween decorations for the night's feast. Everyone had quite the laugh when the Weasley twins were blasted backwards by Dumbledore's age line, their aging potions proving to be completely ineffective. Then they sprouted huge white beards, and they joined in on the laughter. Angelina Johnson, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, put her name into thunderous applause from Holly and her friends. Here come the Beauxbatons students, Hermione said, and as Holly turned around she saw all the 7th-year students from Beauxbatons following Madame Maxime into the Great Hall. One by one, they lined up and put their names into the goblet. Holly frowned at that. Whose name had the defense professor been entering then, she wondered. She put the thought out of her mind, however, as everyone headed down to the Quidditch stadium. She wasn't going to be a champion, so it didn't really matter to her if Beauxbatons had fixed who they wanted their champion to be or something. The first-year dueling competition happened before the match, and it wasn't particularly exciting. A few purebloods tried very weak stunning spells to no effect while most of the duelists just shot jinxes or sparks at one another. One girl from Durmstrang had clearly learned the disarming charm, and she easily cruised to victory by casting it every time. Unfortunately, Slytherin won the match against one of the Beauxbatons teams. Not having houses, Beauxbatons organized its Quidditch teams based on the 4 largest wizarding settlements in France. Hermione informed them that the team Slytherin beat was named after the French equivalent of Diagon Alley. After the match, and feeling down at seeing Slytherin win, Holly decided to go visit Hagrid. When he opened the door and let them into his hut, they were all shocked to see that not only was he wearing his best, and truly awful, hairy brown suit but that he had evidently tried to tame his hair. "What's with the new look, Hagrid?" Ginny asked as he started to make some tea. "Well, you know how it is. Gotta look our best with all these foreign schools here," Hagrid said, but he had never been a very good liar. Holly thought, blushing, that perhaps his real reasons had to do with the arrival of the only woman his size Holly had ever seen. "Anyway, you looking forward to the Quidditch this year?" Hagrid asked, sounding very awkward. "Should be brilliant. Although I'm not too sure about the Beauxbatons teams after today." Getting thrashed by the Slytherins, of all people, Ginny said. I'm just hoping Krum won't play for one of the Durmstrang teams, Holly said. I reckon you'd be in a spot of trouble if he did, Hagrid said, and they all laughed. They ended up having lunch at Hagrid's, which included a beef casserole that tasted alright but had a few suspicious talons turn up. It seemed that the blast-ended Skrewts had been killing one another. What do you think Malfoy looks so down about? Ron asked after they spotted the blonde-haired Slytherin on their way back to the castle. He was sitting out on the grounds, reading a letter, and he looked far too unhappy after his victory. Maybe Malfoy Sr. refused to buy a firebolt for every member of the Slytherin team, and some other rich pureblood has made them a better offer to Beseeker, Ginny said. Whatever it is, I hope it gets worse, Ron said, to general laughter. Hey, Holly, shouted Fred, freshly shaved, as she walked back into the entrance hall. Hey, Fred, George, Holly said, waving to the twins. What are we, chopped liver? Ron asked. Ickle Ronikins and our lovely little sister aren't going to enter the tournament. We were just wondering if you'd put your name in. George asked. I thought about trying to get past the age line, but even if I could, it sounds like a lot of danger for some gold and fame. Things I already have a bunch of, and besides, we'll be busy enough with Quidditch this year, Holly said. Probably smart. I reckon you'd do just as well as that Diggory, though, Fred said. There's nothing wrong with Cedric, Hermione said. He's a total prat, Ron said. A good-looking prat, though, Holly said. That's what Angelina said, Fred said, and Holly laughed. Holly spent the rest of the day finishing up her homework and then playing Exploding Snap and Wizard's Chess in the common room after it started to rain. It was only a light downpour at first, but it steadily grew and grew until by the time Holly and her friends were heading down to the feast it was coming down in sheets. The feast seemed to stretch out, everyone talking about who might become a champion and what the tasks would be. Lee Jordan swore that he had a reliable source for one of the tasks involving the champions fighting the giant squid. Ron suggested that McGonagall would make another giant chessboard, which Holly thought might actually be an interesting task but was unlikely to happen. Eventually, after all the desserts were cleared away and the tables left bare save for golden goblets of pumpkin juice, Dumbledore stood up. Finished with a minute to spare. The goblet has almost reached a decision, so, champions, when your name is called out, please come up here to the staff table and enter the next chamber, Dumbledore said, waving his wand. All the candles floating in the air and within the various pumpkins placed as decoration went out at once, leaving only the bright blue flame of the goblet to illuminate the great hall. Then it burned red for only a second, a bright crimson red, and Dumbledore plucked a singed bit of parchment from the air. Holly felt herself hold her breath in anticipation. The champion for Durmstrang will be Viktor Krum, Dumbledore announced, and everyone in the hall went crazy. Ron actually stood up and started clapping. All the Durmstrang students were cheering, and Holly saw Karkaroff smile for the first time since he'd arrived. No surprises there, Ron said as he sat back down. Anyone who can pull off a Runsky feint that good can be a champion easy, Ginny said. The goblet shot out another tongue of crimson fire, and Dumbledore caught the next bit of parchment as nimbly as he had the first. Holly thought, in a moment of bizarre levity, that he'd probably make a decent keeper. The champion for Beauxbatons is Fleur Delacour. That's that girl you thought was a Veela, Hermione said, as one of the girls from Beauxbatons stood up. Part Veela. And Holly said I was right, Ron said. Just because she's good-looking doesn't make her a Veela, Hermione said. The Veela at the World Cup didn't affect you, did they? Maybe if there were boy Veela who'd won Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times running, Ginny said, snickering. Hermione blushed scarlet at the indirect mention of Lockhart. They don't look as happy for her as Durmstrang did for Krum, Holly said. Several of the Beauxbatons students were crying, and one boy looked like he was ready to get up and storm out. Then, another flash of red fire heralded the Hogwarts champion being chosen. Dumbledore grabbed the bit of singed parchment and smiled slightly. The champion for Hogwarts is Cedric Diggory, Dumbledore said, and Holly was sure Ron had said something but she couldn't hear it over the enormous roar the Hufflepuffs seemed to give as one. They stood and cheered, and Holly clapped a little herself. After what seemed to be quite a while, the applause had died down and Dumbledore was able to speak again. Good choice all around. I'm sure you would all agree. Those of you who were not selected, now that you can still help your SCH, Dumbledore began to say, only to be interrupted by another gout of crimson fire. Holly knew what it would read even before Dumbledore caught her gaze. She shook her head, and Dumbledore nodded once. Holly, Dumbledore said, but before he had even finished reading out her name, the goblet sent up a fifth blast of red fire, and then went out. Dumbledore grabbed the bit of parchment and seemed to compare the two for a moment. Holly could see every head in the Great Hall turn to look at her. It felt like she was trapped in some bizarre joke, that she would become a champion because it was dangerous and thus surely it would happen to her. Holly Potter, Dumbledore said, and Holly felt stuck to her seat. Surely Dumbledore didn't want her to go up with the champions, but then she remembered his words the previous night. If her name had come out of the Goblet of Fire, she was bound by a magical contract to compete. Her hands were shaking underneath the table, and she felt like screaming. Why now, of all times, she despaired. I didn't put my name in, Holly said. She was met only with blank stares. Up here, please, Miss Potter, Dumbledore said more forcefully, and Holly got up. She shoved her hands into her pockets so that no one could see them, and walked up to the staff table. People stared at her and whispered as she walked past, wondering how she'd done it. Draco Malfoy was staring at her wide-eyed, and the Hufflepuffs seemed to be mostly giving her death glares. She felt glad that, when she heard the Gryffindors whisper, it was mostly about who could have put her name in. They might, Holly thought, have believed she put her name in once, but she'd have no reason to do it twice. Even just as she walked up to the staff table, she heard such varied theories as the Minister, Dumbledore, or Malfoy. Luna Lovegood, on the Ravenclaw table, suggested that the Rotfang conspiracy was behind it all. Go on in, Holly, Dumbledore said, putting a hand on her shoulder. She nodded and walked past all the staring teachers, and into the chamber beyond. It was full of comfortable couches and paintings of distinguished-looking witches and wizards. Cedric, Krum, and Fleur were all sitting in a rough circle on the various couches, talking to one another in low voices. They all looked up when she entered. What is it, do they want us back in the hall? Fleur asked, but Holly saw Cedric's eyes go wide as Holly got close enough that the low candlelight illuminated her face. Holly, he asked, and she nodded slowly. Dumbledore, Karkaroff, Maxime, Bagman, and Hull all entered the room behind Holly, and Bagman seemed to be thrilled with the turn of events. How extraordinary! Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce the fourth Triwizard Champion, Holly Potter. Chapter 49, Year 4, Chapter 15. Chapter Text. That's a funny joke, Mr. Bagman, Fleur said, and she started to laugh only to stop as she saw the expression of Madame Maxime's face. The huge headmistress was not happy. Victor and Cedric mostly seemed to look confused at what was going on. Joke? No, Miss Potter's name just came out of the goblet, twice. Bagman said. But there has been a mistake. This little girl is too young. Fleur said, and Holly bristled. What had Fleur done that compared to killing a basilisk or dueling a Death Eater? Indeed, Dumbledore, there cannot be two Hogwarts champions, such a thing is intolerable. Madame Maxime said. If I had known underage students were to compete anyway, I would have brought along a far wider selection of potential champions, Karkaroff said. Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire, Holly? Dumbledore asked calmly, ignoring the other two headmasters for the moment. No, I didn't, sir, why would I? Holly asked. 10,000 galleons and a shot at eternal glory sound like reason enough for some spoiled little girl, Fleur began, only to be interrupted by Moody speaking up. Were you born stupid, or did someone hit you on the head on your way over from France? Potter's got enough gold to never work a day in her life and more fame than she could ever want. Add to that the dark magic that would be needed to influence the goblet, Moody said, and Dumbledore held up a hand. Enough, Alastair. Miss Delacour is understandably upset. I'm sure she meant nothing by her comments. Did you have someone else put your name in, Holly? Dumbledore asked. No. Besides, even if I had put my name in and confounded the goblet into giving me my own school or something, why would I do it twice, she asked. A good point, lass, Moody said. She cannot compete, Dumbledore. Two Hogwarts champions is an affront to the tournament, Karkaroff said. It's all a terrible turn of events, but the rules are clear, I'm afraid, Mrs. Hull said. Oh, I suppose the British Ministry is going to give Hogwarts a second champion. Madame Maxime said. Please, Madame Maxime, the rules quite clearly state that any champion whose name comes out of the goblet must compete. They are bound to, by a binding magical contract, Hull said. How can I be bound by a contract I had nothing to do with? Holly asked. The Goblet of Fire is old magic, lass. If it considered whoever entered you to have some kind of authority over you, it might allow them to enter you. Like Karkaroff and Dupont were doing last night, Moody said. Ms. Dupont was merely putting in the names of students who could not make the trip but still wanted to enter their names, Madame Maxime said. As was I. Dumbledore, are you really going to allow this man to harass me over? Karkaroff started to say, but Moody interrupted him. Over that little problem you had with Ministry about being a Death Eater? Moody said, and Holly's eyes went wide. Karkaroff flushed and looked like he might draw his wand and start cursing Moody. Moody, Holly thought, looked like he hoped Karkaroff would. Now gentlemen, let's not get too agitated. Mrs. Hull is right, Potter has to compete, but once or twice? Bagman asked. Once or twice? Holly said, feeling confused. Well, your name did come out twice. Does she have to attempt each task twice, or will one attempt per task satisfy the goblet? Bagman said. Just the once should satisfy the magic of the goblet, I'm sure, Mrs. Hull said. She should still be punished for this blatant cheating. I shall be writing to the ICW about this, Dumbledore, Madame Maxime said. Do you really think a 14-year-old witch, no matter how talented, could cast a confundus charm powerful enough to hoodwink that goblet, Madame Maxime? Got any of your fourth-year students you'd like to see have a crack at it? Moody said. But why would someone enter her if it was not on her instruction? Fleur asked. Because this tournament is dangerous enough for an adult witch or wizard. Potter has plenty of enemies who'd like to see her meet a grisly end, Moody said. You would see some dark plot in this, Karkaroff muttered. I really didn't have anything to do with my name coming out of the goblet. Go get Snape's supply of Veritaserum and I'll take all of it you want, and the answer will still be the same, Holly said, angrily. I hardly think that will be necessary, Miss Potter. Unless either of you has an alternative to offer, Miss Potter will have to compete, Dumbledore said, turning towards Karkaroff and Madame Maxime. They both looked like they were very angry, but they stayed silent. Well, let's get on with business, shall we? The first task is all about testing your courage in the face of the unknown, so no hints. It'll be on November the 24th, and you won't be allowed any help from your teachers. You'll face it armed only with your wands. Am I forgetting anything? Bagman said. That they're exempt from end-of-year exams, owing to the time demands of the tournament, Mrs. Hull said. Oh, yes. Guaranteed for you on your NEWTs, Cedric, and, whatever it is that you do over there, Bagman said, gesturing at Fleur and Crumb. After that, the meeting began to break up. Karkaroff and Madame Maxime led their champions away, whilst Dumbledore, Hull, and Bagman all went up to his office for a nightcap. Holly found herself alone with Cedric, and she didn't know quite what to say. She felt awkward around him and desperately tried not to blush at being alone with him. Looks like we're playing against each other again, eh? Cedric said, and Holly breathed a sigh of relief at his friendly tone. I guess, yeah, Holly said as they walked through the now deserted Great Hall. Did you put your name in? Cedric asked, seriously. I really didn't, Holly said, finally able to look at Cedric. Okay, I believe you. Be a bit silly to do it twice, I suppose, Cedric said. This is me, may the best champion win, Potter. Cedric said, and he offered her his hand. Holly shook it. Yeah. Good luck, Cedric, Holly said, and then she headed up to Gryffindor Tower. Would anyone but her friends believe that she hadn't entered her own name, she wondered. As she ascended the many steps of the grand staircase, her mind angered to darker subjects. Who had put her name in the goblet? Was it someone who just wanted to see her lose, or was it someone who wanted to see her die? She'd seen more than enough people on the map who might be behind it get near the goblet. Karkaroff had apparently been a Death Eater, and Dupont was both French and a yellow-eyed witch, just like one of the emissaries she'd seen in her vision. And, of course, she'd seen enough house elves get near the goblet to be working for half a dozen different people. She was brought out of her stew of suspicions by the fat lady asking her for the password. Balderdash, Holly said distractedly, and she walked into Gryffindor common room not knowing what to expect. She was almost knocked off her feet by the blast of noise that hit her as she walked through the portrait hole. It seemed that there were a dozen people trying to pat her on the back, and she could hardly hear anything over all the cheering and whistling. Holly moved through the crowd and found an empty chair to stand on. Everyone turned to look at her, and silence fell on the room. "Look, I know you're all happy I got chosen, but I didn't put my name in," Holly said. Fred and George exchanged knowing glances with her, and Holly rolled her eyes. "Sure you didn't," Mate Lee Jordan said with an exaggerated wink. "I didn't. Do you think I'd be dumb enough to put my name in twice if I had fixed it?" Holly shouted, and that got people to listen. "If you didn't put your name in, who did?" Ron asked. His tone was almost accusatory. "I dunno, but Dumbledore thinks they were probably trying to get to me," Holly said, hoping that the headmaster's word would give her some added credibility. "Wait, Dumbledore thinks it's a setup?" Fred asked. "Do you have to compete, then?" George asked. "It's magically binding, apparently. But, look, whoever entered me used some trick to make sure I got selected as a fourth champion. I wouldn't do that. If I'd have entered my name, I'd have done it fair and square, yeah," Holly said. Ron slowly nodded. "I thought that the goblet just got confused because you were underaged, or something," Ron said. Moody said someone confounded it, someone really powerful. "I'm glad you're all excited for me, and I'll take all the help I can get, but," Holly said, unsure what to say. "Party's still on, but let's give our champion some space, yeah," Fred said, and he, George, and Lee Jordan made a little space for Holly near the fire. People soon resumed the party, but whilst Holly had a half-dozen butterbeers passed to her, people seemed content to only occasionally cheer her name. Perhaps the fire Uhisky Fred and George started passing out to the older Gryffindors had something to do with that. "If you really did put your name in, you can tell me, you know," Ron said to her quietly. "I thought about it. Even worked out a plan to get past the age line I was sure would work, but I decided that I'd rather someone else have an exciting year for once," Holly said, laughing. "Well, that was a bit stupid, wasn't it?" Ron said. "Sorry to say I have to agree with my brother on that one," Ginny said. "I reckon I'll need all of you to help me, you know. Cedric and the other champions are all 7th years, and I bet Maxime and Karkaroff are going to be helping their champions despite the rules," Holly said. "Whatever you need, mate. We're gonna bring this home for Gryffindor," Ron said. "You know, I bet there's gonna be a chess competition as part of one of the events. Maybe you'll get me one of McGonagall's enchanted chess pieces as a buddy or something," Holly said. She knew Ron got jealous sometimes, but she thought making Keeper and her being a girl had softened the sting a little. "You think? Imagine that White Queen smashing Diggory into paste," Ron said. "Ron," Hermione said, and Ron flushed. Holly was vividly remembering Hermione's Bogart. "Sorry, Hermione. So, if you didn't put your name in, who did?" Ron asked. "So when I decided not to put my name in, I may have stayed up and watched the Great Hole on the map," Holly said, and she began to explain what she'd seen last night. "So it might the French lady, Karkaroff, who may have been a Death Eater, or someone using an elf." Ginny summarized. "Is it really dangerous enough to go through all this effort to get you?" Ron asked. "Lots of champions, especially younger champions, have died in the past," Hermione said. "Fire Uhisky, Holly?" George asked, holding a tiny little glass out to her. "Sure," Holly said. Her night had already been crazy enough, trying the wizarding alcohol couldn't be that bad. "Holly?" Hermione whispered, but Holly had already taken the tiny glass and downed it. It burned going down her throat and tasted awful. "Merlin, why do people like that stuff?" she gasped, sputtering. Hermione laughed loudly, and then after a moment so did Ron and Ginny. "How would you have tried to get past the age line, anyway?" Ron asked. "I was gonna just ask Angelina to do it, and judging by the questions Dumbledore asked me, that might have worked," Holly said. "You're joking," Ron said. "Merlin, Do I feel like an idiot? I thought you had some spell or something. Holly went to sleep that night worried, but as she tossed and turned she started to feel something strange, excitement. Despite the danger, there was a part of her looking forward to trying to win the Triwizard Tournament. Chapter 50, Year 4, Chapter 16. Chapter Text. Holly gave Hedwig an owl treat and then finished tying her letter to Sirius to Hedwig's leg. Her owl hooted at her, nuzzled her hand a little, and leapt into the air. You guys didn't need to come with me, Holly said to Ron and Ginny, who had made the early morning walk to the owlery with her. 3 Hufflepuffs tried to hex you on the way here, mate, and some of them were pretty nasty, Ron said. I can handle schoolyard jinxes. But that was a nice deflection on the last one, Ron, Holly said. Ron blushed a little and looked awkward. Well, it wasn't very sporting of Ernie Macmillan to try and get you in the back, was it, Ron said, as the 3 of them walked down from the owlery. Think you're some kind of hero, Potter? Always trying to get in the news. What's with the weasel, is he your boyfriend or something? Thomas Avery, a burly 7th year, said. He had a few other older Slytherins with him, and the corridor was deserted. Holly gripped her wand in her pocket. Ron's not my boyfriend. What's your problem, Avery? Didn't you call Diggory an obnoxious little twerp just last week? Now you're his biggest fan. Holly replied. This isn't about the tournament, you little psycho, Avery said, taking his wand from his pocket. His friends did the same. Then what is it about, Avery, or are you just that eager to get yourself hexed? Holly asked. Ron had his wand out now too and was looking around at the number of older Slytherins backing Avery up nervously. Holly, mate, Ron said, putting a hand on her arm. You know what you did, Avery said, and Holly realized for the first time just how angry he was. He wasn't shouting or screaming, but behind his eyes was a cold, dangerous rage. I really don't. I'm going to be honest with you, Avery, I've never so much as thought about you before today, Holly said. Then she saw it. Before one of Avery's friends could complete the wand motion for his silent hex, Holly cast an unverbal disarming charm and plucked his wand out of the air. He went stumbling backwards from the force of the spell, and Holly whirled around to deflect Avery's instant scalping hex. The bolt of red light bounced off of her shield charm and hit another of his friends. The long-haired Slytherin girl shrieked as all her hair started to fall out, but Avery ignored her and fired off a cutting charm at Holly. Ron deflected it and started firing stunners at Avery. This doesn't concern you, Weasley. On account of your blood, I'll let you leave if you know what's good for you, Avery snarled. You've got another thing coming if you think I'm going to let you hurt my friend. Stupefy. Ron said. Holly deflected another hex from Avery, stunned the now bald Slytherin girl, and turned her wand back on Avery. He had only 2 people still up fighting with him now, and they both looked very nervous. Avery was struggling to hold back tears. Holly felt something, and instinctively she knew what he was going to cast. Before she could even begin to move, ropes coiled around Avery and his 2 remaining companions. Holly heard the distinctive, discordant gait of Mad-Eye Moody come round the corner. How, she wondered, hadn't she heard him sooner? You're damn lucky I report to Dumbledore and not the Minister, now, boy. Otherwise, you'd have a cell waiting for you. Dumbledore on the other hand has some damn fool notion about redemption and grief, Moody said, putting his wand away. Avery started to cry, and Holly felt like she had done something wrong. What had she done to this boy she'd never so much as talked to before? Potter, Avery began, but Moody didn't let him talk. Potter didn't kill your father, brat. His own out-of-control curse did that, a curse he was using to terrorize and kill innocents, mind you, Moody said. Holly finally understood, and she felt sick. Was Thomas Avery the son of the Death Eater she'd killed with his own fiend-fil? Let's get going, Holly, Ron said, and she made a noise of agreement numbly. She couldn't get the sight of Thomas Avery's crying face out of her mind all day, and she wandered around as if she was in a daze. Just before dinner, Holly was alone on the bridge. She didn't feel all that hungry, and she didn't want to face the adoration of her house or the hatred of the rest of the school all that much. It's a lovely view, Potter, Moody said, and Holly whirled around. How had he snuck up on her like that? How do you keep sneaking up on me with that leg? Holly asked. Simple silencing charming on my feet, lass. Are you all right? Moody asked. I'm fine. Just not particularly hungry, she said. That's crap, Potter. Thinking about Avery? Moody asked. She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. You know, I could tell you things about his father that'd send you running to the hills. But you already knew he was a murderous bastard, Moody said. I didn't need to kill him, Holly said, very quietly. Maybe. But he'd already escaped justice once, Moody said. That doesn't make it easier to look at his son, Holly said. I don't have an easy answer, Potter. But if you want to talk, Moody said. The sun began to touch the horizon, throwing orange light across the bridge. I think I'm good, Professor. For now, anyway, Holly said, and she headed back into the castle. Her friends would be worried if she missed dinner. The next few days were rough for Holly. It seemed that everyone other than the Gryffindors was firmly on the side of her having put her name in. The Slytherins hated her, of course, but the Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws were unusually vicious towards her. The only Ravenclaw who was so much as polite to Holly was Luna Lovegood, who told Holly that she believed her about someone else entering her name into the Goblet of Fire. Ministry errors arrived on Tuesday, casting forensic spells all over the goblet and conducting interviews. Nobody talked to Holly about what they'd found, but other than confirming that she hadn't put her name into the goblet, she was sure they hadn't found much. Even her suspicions weren't all that strong. Karkaroff was probably just putting Krumm's name in, and Dumont had a legitimate reason to have been there too. Holly could hardly accuse her of being a dark witch in league with Voldemort on the basis of her eye color and accent. Yellow eyes were unusual, but Dumont wasn't even the only teacher at Hogwarts with them. Madame Hooch's eyes were just as vivid. Outside of double potions, Pansy Parkinson started to hand out badges proclaiming Cedric Diggory to be the real Hogwarts champion. They changed between that and saying Potter stinks, which Holly thought was a low water mark for Pansy's barbs. Like them, Potter? Pansy asked, clearly trying and failing to stop herself from cackling. Oh, very clever, Pansy. Did you write those insults yourself, or did you get Crabbe and Goyle to handle that part for you? Hermione said. Want one, Granger? I'll have to throw it to you, though. Don't want to get mudblood slime all over me, Pansy said, waving one of the badges at Hermione. Leave it, Pansy, Draco said, worriedly. What, Draco? But Pansy said, but he said something to her in a low voice and she went white. Holly was about to say something, but Snape arrived around the corner, his black cloak flapping as though a strong wind was blowing. Miss Parkinson, kindly keep your badge-making activities confined to non-class time. Potter, you're wanted on the 5th floor. Tournament business, Snape said, the most words he'd spoken to Holly in a year. She blinked, a little unsure of what had just happened. Well. Get on with it, Snape said, and Holly left her things with Hermione and headed up to the 5th floor. There was a small sign on the exit from the grand staircase, saying weighing of the wands this way. Holly thought that was probably where she needed to go, so she followed the chain of signs into a classroom she'd never been in before. All the other champions were there, along with Ludo Bagman, though not Mrs. Hull, as well as Bagman, a witch Holly had never seen in person, was there along with a man holding a camera. Rita Skeeter, wearing bright green robes, was standing with the other adults with a bored expression on her face. Ah, there she is. In you come, Holly. Just the wand weighing ceremony, nothing to worry about, Bagman said, as he led Holly over to the other champions. Wand weighing? Holly asked, confused. Oh, the expert's up with Dumbledore now. Just to check that your wand is in good working order, a little photo shoot for the press, Bagman said. On that topic, my dear Ludo, might I borrow our youngest champion, add a little color, you know, Skeeter said, putting her hands on Holly's shoulders. Oh, we should have plenty of time, if Holly has no objections, of course, Bagman said. I guess that's fine. Holly said, not really sure of her answer. Good, follow me, dearie, Skeeter said, steering Holly into a nearby broom cupboard. She sat down opposite Holly, putting her snakeskin handbag down and retrieving a lime green quill and a piece of parchment from it. Don't mind me using a quick quotes quill? Skeeter asked. That's all right, Miss Skeeter, Holly said. She was unsure how to talk to the magical reporter, so she defaulted to politeness. Oh, do call me Rita, dear. Miss Skeeter was my mother. Skeeter said. Holly saw the lime green quill write something on the parchment, which Rita tore off. So, Holly, rumors are swirling, did you really enter your name in the goblet? Skeeter asked. I didn't put my name in, as I'm sure the Aurors who came and investigated would be happy to tell you, Holly said. Well, you wouldn't have bungled it and had your name come out twice, would you? Order of Merlin at 13, your heroics in confronting dark wizards, do you think you're more qualified than Dingby to be the Hogwarts champion? Skeeter asked Holly, the quill writing rapidly out of Holly's sight. It's Diggory MS, Rita. And Cedric's who the goblet chose to be Hogwarts' champion. Whoever entered me did so under a different school, 2 different schools, Holly said. Oh, you wouldn't want to say a word against him, of course. He's quite the handsome lad, isn't he? Is there a romance brewing amongst the champions? Skeeter said. There's nothing going on between me and Cedric, Holly said, blushing. Not, she thought, that she would mind if there was. You're quite the unusual witch, so excuse me if this is an insensitive question, but do you like handsome strapping lads like Diggleby, or are buxom vixens like the Partvila girl more your thing? I don't think that's really a Holly began, but Skeeter interrupted her. Or both maybe, that would fit your daring rebel image, wouldn't it? And you are a Quidditch player, you know what they say about the Harpies, Skeeter said, and Holly blushed deeply. She did know what people said about the Holyhead Harpies, and about Gryffindor's chasers. Before Holly could respond, the door of the broom cupboard was pulled open. Dumbledore, Ollivander, the Wand Maker, and the other headmasters were standing there. A pleasant surprise to see you, Dumbledore. How are you? I hope you saw my piece on the ICW conference this summer. Skeeter said, as her quill and parchment seemed to vanish back into her handbag at great speed. Enchantingly nasty as always, Rita. Now, if you will release Miss Potter, we have a ceremony to attend. Dumbledore asked. Holly felt like she'd just been saved from something, though she wasn't sure what it was. Still feeling a little windswept, she followed the others back into the classroom. Chapter 51, Year 4, Chapter 17. Chapter Text. Rosewood, 9.5 inches. Fine wood, from, I'm getting sidetracked. The core is the unusual thing. I don't believe I've ever heard this particular song before, Ollivander said quietly, as he examined Flua's wand. It is Vila hair. One of my grandmothers, Fleur said proudly. Oh, of course. Such familial connections make for powerful, loyal wands. But I think this must not have been purchased, no. Ollivander said. You are correct, Mr. Ollivander. My great-grandfather is Fleur began. You're one of those Delacours. My dear girl, do say hello to Jax for me. It has been too long since we've seen one another, to think I didn't recognize his work right away. Yes, your wand is in fine working order, Miss Delacour, Ollivander said, handing Fleur's wand back to her. Mr. Krum next, I think, Bagman said, gently steering Ollivander over to Krum. The elderly wand maker looked to Holly like he was about to roll his eyes. Still, he took Krum's wand and cast a few minor spells with it, nodding as he did so. This is a Gregorovic, isn't it? He always did make them a little thick for my tastes, but still, good, fine work. Hornbeam and Dragon Heartstring. You must be a man of singular passion to have commanded the loyalty of this wand, Mr. Krum, Ollivander said, smiling at Krum. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander, Krum said a little awkwardly. Now Mr. Diggory, yes, that will work well. One of my own creations, of course, Ollivander said, moving over to Cedric. He took his wand and cast a few spells, conjuring songbirds and refilling the water in his goblet. It's served me well, over the years, Cedric said. I should hope it has, the unicorn whose tail hair resides in its core nearly gored me. Well, you've taken good care of it, and it is in good working order, which leaves us just with Miss Potter's wand, Ollivander said, approaching Holly as he spoke. She went still as she remembered the first time she had seen the wand maker, and what he'd told her about her wand. She knew that if he repeated that here, Rita Skeeter would print it so fast it might still make the evening edition. I suppose it does, yeah, Holly said nervously. Phony feather and holly, how appropriate. One of my finer works, I think. I understand, from what I've read in the papers, the phoenix whose feathers give your wand its core has been of aid to you. Ollivander asked. Fawkes helped me during, well, down in the Chamber of Secrets, Holly said. Excellent, excellent. You have certainly put it through its paces, but this was not a wand made for display. It should give you loyal service so long as you have need of it, Ollivander said, looking from Holly to Dumbledore somewhat oddly. Well, that's excellent news. All in working order, not that I really expected. Anyway, time for photos. Bagman said. Getting all the photos Rita wanted took a very long time, and Holly even began to feel a little sorry for Rita's cameraman as he tried in vain to get her and Madame Maxime in the same shot. Krum seemed to dislike being photographed as much as Holly did, though unfortunately, Rita had far more pictures taken of the two of them than she had of Cedric and Fleur. Holly felt like she ought to have put makeup on or done something with her uniform, but there was nothing she could do by the time she learned photos would be taken. Dinner was contentious that night. The Gryffindors were as welcoming as ever, but Holly could feel the rest of the school staring at her as she ate her roast chicken. Thomas Avery seemed to be stewing in his anger on the Slytherin table, determinedly not looking at her. What did they want with you, anyway? Ron asked. Just some weird ceremony about checking if our wands worked. Then I got ambushed by Rita Skeeter, Holly said. That woman is vile, Holly. Have you seen what she's written in the Daily Prophet about, well, about anything? Hermione asked. Not really, but after meeting her I'd believe it, Holly said. Later that night, just as she was sitting down in a comfy chair in the Gryffindor common room, an owl tapped its talons against the window. It's for you, Holly. Dean shouted, and Holly reluctantly stood up and walked over to the window. The envelope was indeed addressed to her, but there was something heavy inside it. She knew that the wards on the castle prevented anything too dangerous from being sent in the mail, so Holly opened the envelope up. Inside was a letter from her godfather, and a small mirror. She took out the letter first, and read it. Dear Holly. Dumbledore owled me right away, but it was good to hear about the tournament from you anyway. Remus and I looked into getting the contract unbound, but several curse breakers we've talked to all agreed that it was probably too dangerous to try. As mad as it sounds, competing honestly is probably your safest choice. The mirror included with this letter used to belong to your father. It's a two-way mirror we used to talk to each other when one of us was in detention. I have the other half. Merely ask for me by name and we should be able to talk to one another face to face. There are things we need to talk about that suit that better than a letter. Sirius. Holly grinned as she read the letter. She'd had no idea that something like the two-way mirror was even possible. She also wasn't all that surprised that getting out of the Goblet's contract would be as dangerous as competing, or even more so. Ron and Hermione were busy playing chess, and Ginny was talking to some girls from her year, so Holly decided to go up to her dorm room. She closed the curtains on her bed, and took out the mirror from the envelope. Sirius Black, she said, and her own reflection in the slightly dirty glass of the mirror seemed to dissolve. In her place, she saw the ceiling of Grimmauld Place's kitchen. She heard someone approach, and Sirius picked the mirror up. Merlin, it's good to see you, Holly. How are you holding up? Sirius asked. I'm all right, I guess. Half the school hates me for upstaging Cedric, but that's nothing new, Holly said. They'll come around eventually. What about you, though? I know you're not exactly one to scare easily, but the tournament is, Sirius said, trialing off. I know it's dangerous, but the stupid thing is I was this close to sneaking down and trying to put my name in. Is it wrong I almost want to compete? Holly asked. I know I would have, at your age. Don't take any risks you don't have to, but Dumbledore seemed pretty confident you could handle the tasks, Sirius said. Really? Did he tell you anything about them? Holly asked. You know Dumbledore, even when Maxime and Karkaroff are cheating like dogs he insisted on not telling me anything about them. Just keep your wits about with Karkaroff, yeah. He might have managed to slip out of Azkaban, but he was a Death Eater, Sirius said. I will, Sirius, Holly said, and there was silence for a moment. There were things Holly wanted to say, but she didn't know how to. She had never had someone like Sirius or Remus in her life before. You know you can talk to me, if you need to. Or Remus, if you're feeling like getting some decent advice instead of my crap, Sirius said. I know, Holly said, instead of telling Sirius about her encounter with Thomas Avery. Her sleep that night was disturbed by nightmares, though thankfully they faded from her memory in moments after she woke. The next morning, an owl brought her a copy of the Daily Prophet as usual. She would normally glance at the headlines and then skip to the sports section to read about the Quidditch, but she saw that Rita Skeeter's article about the champions was on the front page. There was a moving photograph of Holly and Crumb, and two much smaller photos of all four champions. Showdown at Hogwarts. Bulgaria's Starseeker vs Britain's girl hero for the Triwizard Cup. Holly Potter and Victor Crumb are more alike than their appearances would suggest. Both have a strong rebel spirit, and a surprising shyness when it comes to the press. To see them in their element, you would never guess that they both are nervous when it comes to interviews and press photographs. How could someone fearless enough to run towards danger like they do be nervous when confronted by as unthreatening a figure as this reporter? It's sometimes hard to remember that our heroes are merely human. But that's what I saw when I met both champions this week at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Victor Crumb is a soft-spoken and sensitive boy of 17 who seems almost awkward on his own 2 feet instead of a broom. Holly Potter seems to be just like any other fourth-year girl, blushing at the suggestion that she has a love life. But even when they are just like us, these two titans are unique. When I asked Victor Crumb what he was looking for in a witch, he surprised me by saying that the thing he values most of all is intelligence and personality, and he meant it. Holly Potter wouldn't give me any direct answers, though this reporter has her suspicions about her and the other Hogwarts champion, Cedric Diggory, but she would reveal that she is interested in both witches and wizards. For more from that interview, see this week's edition of Witch Weekly. I also had the chance to speak to the other two champions, Cedric Diggory and Fleur Delacour. Cedric is a Hufflepuff in his 7th year, and also a seeker for his house team, whilst Fleur seems to have been selected for her looks, not her mind. For a detailed breakdown of each champion's skills, see page 3. For betting odds, check the sports section. That, if I ever get my hands on that bitch, Holly said. What Skeeter had said about her was bad enough, but the way she treated Cedric and Fleur was awful. How could the woman get her articles published on the front page of the newspaper and not be able to spell Cedric's name right? I told you she's completely awful. There's not really much you can do, though, Hermione said. You're probably right. You want to look at the sports section, Ron? Holly asked. Ron shook his head. The Chudley Cannons had lost too badly for him to want to read about it. That night, Holly met Dumbledore in his office. He'd said at the end of their last meeting that they would be learning something other than occlumency tonight, and Holly was excited. It wasn't that being able to protect her mind was bad, but it wasn't very exciting. Ah, Holly. You haven't suffered too greatly from Rita's poison quill? Dumbledore asked. I'll be fine, Professor, she replied. Excellent. Tonight we shall turn our studies from the cerebral arts of mind magic to something a little more dramatic. If you would take my hand. Dumbledore asked. Holly took it, and then she felt like she was being squeezed through a very tight tube. All she could see was whirling colors until she found herself somewhere very different from Dumbledore's warm office. She and the headmaster seemed to be standing on a large and utterly barren rocky island, just barely in sight of the shore. The sea swirled around the island, dark and cold, and the wind made Holly shiver. Did we really need to come all the way out here, Professor? She asked. I'm afraid that the grounds are rather too flammable for the content of our lesson today, Holly. Now, if you are ready, let us begin, Dumbledore said, and he took out his own wand. Sir, what am I learning? Holly asked. Whatever it was had to be destructive if they'd come to such a desolate place to learn it, Holly thought. We will be learning about fire, both how to conjure it, and how to control it. Many spells make use of it, and it is a common danger that those of us who lead more adventurous lives face, Dumbledore said. Holly felt the smallest shake in her hand. Cool, she said, putting the image of the Death Eater being consumed by Fiendfyre out of her mind. It refused to stay away for all that long, but Holly soon found the excitement of the lesson was enough to make her forget it for a while. Dumbledore taught Holly all about how to conjure and control magical fire, covering everything from using whips of fire in a duel to putting out a burning building. With only one student, who seemed to drink up whatever he taught her, Dumbledore jumped from spell to spell with great speed. Holly wasn't able to match the huge firestorms Dumbledore could conjure, but she had most of the spells down well enough. She could call up whips of fire to attack, summon huge gouts of it to deal with creatures, and protect herself and others from magical, if not cursed, fire. It was an odd choice for their first lesson on practical magic, Holly thought, but she wasn't complaining. Chapter 52, Year 4, Chapter 18. Chapter Text. A week before the first task, Holly found herself wishing her invisibility cloak was a little warmer. She was waiting in the pitch darkness by the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and she was sure midnight had come and already gone. "Why'd Hagrid have to ask me to sneak out this late, anyway?" Holly said under her breath to no one. She muttered another warming charm, but there was only so much she could do against the bitterly cold wind blowing eerily through the forest. She could feel its currents even when she wasn't transformed now, and that intuitive understanding was helping her on the Quidditch pitch. At least, it had helped her during Angelina's training sessions. They might be slightly less demented than Wood's had been, but only slightly. "Thank you for the brandy, Hagrid, but we had best get moving. I must attend the Quidditch match this afternoon," Madame Maxime said, emerging from the shadows with surprisingly quiet footsteps. Hagrid was just behind her, and he glanced meaningfully at the spot Holly was hiding in. You're right. Hope you won't take offense if I'm cheering for Gryffindor," Hagrid said as he passed Holly. "Not at all. I know that was your own, what is the word? Ah, yes, was your own house. And you are close to the Potter girl." "That I am. Introduced her to the magical world, this way. Now, you said you did some hunting." "One must keep the manticore populations controlled and the governors entertained," Maxime said haughtily. "I bet that's a right difficult job, unless they let you feed them to the manticores over there. But we're gonna need to be right quiet when we approach. I'm technically not supposed to be showing you this, after all. Got a mate there who won't mind showing us around, but best not to draw attention," Hagrid said, and Holly felt her interest grow. What would Hagrid be showing Madame Maxime, and her, out here in the dead of night? If he had some frightening new monster for a pet, he could just show them in the daylight. The two Titanic people, well beyond any Muggle Holly had ever heard of, were bizarrely quiet as they made their way through the forest. Holly had a hard time keeping up with their much longer stride without making a racket, so she carefully hid her cloak and transformed. As a raven, she was able to keep Hagrid and Madame Maxime in sight without alerting half the forests as to where she was. She soared on the cold wind that had been so biting just moments ago, flying in lazy arcs that stopped her from overtaking Hagrid. Holly smelled something she didn't recognize on the wind. It wasn't the smell of a centaur band, nor the rotting meat of a thestral herd. It was a harsh scent full of ash and smoke. She banked around a particularly thick cluster of trees and saw a flash of bright light. A gout of fire 100 feet long had been blasted into the air, white hot and almost too bright to look at, by a creature larger than a double-decker bus. Holly beat her wings rapidly in a moment of panic as she recognized the dragon in the clearing ahead. Jets of red light splashed futilely across its hide as it trashed against thick black iron chains. It ceased breathing fire to roar, and the sound nearly knocked Holly out of the air. "All right there, Hagrid," a man said, and Holly saw Charlie Weasley approach Hagrid and Madame Maxime. "Blimey, she's not happy," Hagrid said. "We told the Ministry that nesting mothers will think their fake eggs are real. Bloody uncontrollable they are if they think they are defending their eggs," Charlie said. "They are not using real eggs, then," Madame Maxime said. "No dragon handler D agree to that." "Certainly none from a reputable reserve," Charlie replied and then got closer to Hagrid. "You didn't tell me you were bringing her along as well," Charlie whispered to him. "Quite right too. Endangered species, dragons are. Can't be risking whole clutches of eggs," Hagrid said loudly. "I just thought she might like to see 'em. It's not like she doesn't know the broad strokes of the tasks, anyway," Hagrid whispered back. Charlie went on to point out, from their vantage point, each dragon. There was the Chinese fireball, which had breath that might be more appropriately called explosive rather than flame. The common Welsh green, famous for its venomous fangs, each the size and sharpness of a saber, snapped angrily at its handlers. The Swedish short snout, notable for its sheer bulldog-like bulk, was sleeping soundly. The Hungarian horntail, which was covered in bone spikes and other dangerous-looking things, was busy breathing fire at anyone who tried to get near it. Holly watched the dragons for some time before she flew back out of the forest and retrieved her cloak. She made sure to leave a note under Hagrid's door with her thanks and headed back up to Gryffindor Tower. Nobody else was awakened in the common room, so she quickly retrieved the two-way mirror and sat down across from the dying embers of the fire. "Sirius," she said, hoping that her godfather would be awake at this time of night. "Holly, what's wrong?" Sirius said, responding almost immediately. "The first task, Sirius. The first task is dragons," Holly said. "You're sure?" Sirius asked, and Holly heard someone else approach the mirror. "Hagrid showed me them. Charlie Weasley is here with the dragon handlers," Holly said. "How's your flame freezing charm?" Remus said as entered the mirror's field of view. "Excellent. Dumbledore taught me a whole bunch of spells about fire last week," Holly said. Sirius laughed loudly. "Of course he did," Sirius said, still laughing. "I don't think they are going to have you fight them, Holly. Most likely they are going to want you to get past them. Using dragons as guard animals is a long-standing tradition. In that case, you'll want to look up something called a conjunctivitis curse. Nothing else besides powerful dark magic will do much through their hide, but if you can get them in the eyes with that," Remus said. "A distraction would be a good idea, still. Are you any good at casting the snake conjuring charm?" Sirius asked. "What, serpent sorcerer? I've never tried it, but I could learn." "Why, though?" Holly said. "Dragons don't actually eat humans, too fond of spiky metal things and magic to make good food. Present it with something more interesting, and you might be able to sneak around it. Maybe put a silencing charm on yourself if you think your nonverbal shields will be good enough," Sirius said. Holly, Sirius, and Remus spent nearly an hour strategizing until Holly remembered that she had a Quidditch match in the morning. She went to bed full of ideas on how to get past her dragon, and though she only got a little sleep she was still confident going into the match. Despite the impending danger of the first task, Holly was in top form that morning. She flew with expert precision, her innate understanding of the air and flight greatly improved thanks to her mastery of her animagus form. She danced between bludgers, led opposing chasers into one another, and caught the snitch in 15 minutes. Hufflepuff booed her as one, and she even had to dodge a Jinx shot at her from the stands. Holly was starting to think that Beauxbatons simply didn't have as good a Quidditch program as Hogwarts, which she supposed probably made sense. Few countries were as obsessed with the game as those that Hogwarts drew its students from, after all. The second-year dueling competition was held after the Quidditch match, and Holly was surprised to see the champion of the first years do quite well. The Durmstrang girl's disarming charm still worked just as well, but in the final match, she was in turn disarmed by a boy from Beauxbatons. Even though she'd lost in the second-year tournament, the girl had secured a boon for Krum in the upcoming task, as the boy from Beauxbatons had done for Fleur. A sixth-year Hufflepuff had won a Gobstones tournament for Cedric, leaving Holly the only champion without a boon going into the first task. As Holly was walking back up to the castle, after showering and getting changed out of her Quidditch robes, she saw Cedric Diggory hanging around on the grounds. He seemed to be without the crowd of friends and hangers-on that had surrounded him at all times since his name had come out of the goblet. "Holly," he shouted, beckoning her over. She joining him on top of a small hill, with her teammates looking on curiously. What's up, Cedric?" Holly asked. She felt awkward in front of the handsome older boy, especially after the deep animosity that had developed between their houses. "Look, I just want to apologize for how my house has been acting. I've tried to get them to stop, but," Cedric said. I'm used to it. It's not your fault if they want to hate me for a while," Holly said. "But, thanks for trying, yeah. And there's something I need to tell you," Holly continued. She felt like she was being stupid, but she knew Fleur and Krum would already know this, and Cedric had been nothing but decent to her. What is it?" Cedric said, looking at her strangely. "The first task, it's dragons. One for each of us, and we have to get past them." "That's all I know," Holly said quickly. "Are you sure?" "How do you?" Cedric began. "I've seen them. It doesn't matter how, okay?" "Fleur and Krum already know," Holly said. "Why are you telling me?" Cedric asked. Holly wanted to answer that it was because she liked him desperately, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. "You've been really good about all this so far, you know." "I guess I just wanted to repay the favor," Holly said, blushing. Cedric didn't look like he believed her, but she was spared any further mortification when he simply accepted her reasons and wished her good luck. Holly made her way back to Gryffindor Tower feeling a little better. "And you're sure it's dragons?" Hermione asked Holly after she finished telling her friends about the upcoming task that night. "I told you, Hagrid showed them to me. Sirius and Remus have already given me some ideas, but I need to practice the spells, and more ideas couldn't hurt," Holly said. "Maybe Hermione could find some kind of spell for you, but what are Ginny and I going to do?" Ron asked. "Speak for yourself, brother," Ginny said, shoving him playfully. Holly happened to look behind Ron, and she saw that a new notice had been attached to the notice board sometime in the afternoon. She read it and grinned. "Say, Ron, have you checked out the notice board recently?" Holly asked. "What do you mean?" Ron asked, as he turned around and read the new notice. There was a chess competition scheduled for the day before the tournament, and Holly was certain that Ron had a good chance of winning it. "Maybe Bagman knew what he was doing adding in all this extra stuff," Ron said, and Holly laughed. Holly spent much of the next week practicing all the various spells she, Sirius, Remus, and Hermione had been able to come up with. She still turned in her homework, but often at the very last minute and with considerable help from Hermione. She was too busy learning to conjure snakes and blind dragons with curses to give essays on proper wand movement for animal to cutlery transfigurations much attention. Ron did win Holly a boon in the chess competition, easily crushing all of his challengers. None of them expected him to be nearly as good, and Holly thought Hermione should probably introduce him to Muggle chess. He'd probably find more enjoyable games there. Then it was the morning of the first task, and Holly got out of bed feeling both nervous and excited. Chapter 53, Year 4, Chapter 19. Chapter Text. Holly felt her nerves build and build throughout the day so that she was full of energy throughout all of her classes, even History of Magic. But lessons were to stop at midday, and the whole school seemed to share some of Holly's nervous energy. The competitions related to the tournament scene so far had been fun to watch or participate in, but gobstones and firsties attempting to duel could hardly be compared to the tasks themselves. She ate her lunch quickly, and managed to finish off her sandwich and down the last of her pumpkin juice as she saw McGonagall begin to approach her. "With me, Miss Potter." "The champions are heading down now," the professor said, and Holly nodded. "Good luck," Ginny said from across the Gryffindor table, and Holly nodded. She followed McGonagall down the hall and out into the cold November afternoon, shivering a little as the wind blew across the grounds. "Now, just don't panic and try your best in there, Potter. We have trained wizards standing by if things, well, just give a good effort and no one can think less of you," McGonagall said. "Sure, Professor," Holly said. She found herself strangely calm as she saw the stadium for the first time. It was lower to the ground than the Quidditch pitch but otherwise looked quite similar. There was a large box with fancier seating, including a golden table for the judges, and a small tent at the side. A pair of large gates occupied the other end of the stadium, and beyond them, Holly could see the beginning of the dragon enclosure, though the dragons themselves were carefully kept out of sight. Holly went over her plan in her head. She had to temporarily blind the dragon with a pair of conjunctivitis curses and then use summoned snakes as a distraction to sneak up on or past the dragon. She had a few more ideas, but without knowing what she'd actually have to do she couldn't plan in much more detail than she already had. It was, Holly thought, a good plan. She thought she could improvise if it went wrong. Her training with Dumbledore had made her fairly confident when it came to dealing with magical fire, and even her nonverbal shield charms should be able to deflect the dragon's claws. Though she wasn't keen on chancing should against claws the size of a short sword and as sharp as razor. "In here, Potter. Wait for your turn with the other champions. Mr. Bagman will explain the procedure to you, and good luck," McGonagall said, and Holly smiled at her before she entered the tent. Holly noticed with surprise that all the other champions looked significantly more nervous than her. Fleur was clammy and pale, sitting on a low wooden stool and not looking at anyone. Krum was pacing with a fierce look on his face, whilst Cedric was cleaning his wand and looking around nervously. "Once you'd killed a basilisk with a sword," Holly guessed, getting past a dragon simply wasn't as scary as it ought to be. The other champions might have more experience when it came to magic, and they certainly knew more spells than her, although she thought the spells she did know were more likely to be useful in situations like this, but Holly had far more experience when it came to getting out of deadly peril. That was probably a bad thing, but right now Holly was glad for the calm that had come over her. She was still scared, of course, but she was used to being scared. She could work with scared. "Holly, good to see you, come on in, make yourself at home." "That's all of them, Janet," Bagman said, gesturing towards Mrs. Hull. She clearly did not appreciate being called by her first name, but Holly thought she looked more long-suffering than angry. "Yes, Ludo, that's all of the 4 champions. In case you forgot how many there were," Mrs. Hull said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Excellent. I supposed we can explain how it all works now." There it is," Bagman said, searching for something. He pulled a purple silk bag from under a table and turned to face the champions once more. "So, inside this bag is a model of what you're about to face." "What else was there?" "Oh, yes. You're to retrieve the golden egg," Bagman said, grinning. He paused for a moment, and the sound of hundreds of people walking up the stairs into the stands grew very loud inside the tent. Bagman paused for a moment, and Holly saw the other champions get even more nervous. She wondered why Bagman was making such a big show out of concealing that they'd be facing a dragon. Surely he'd expected them all to know that by now. Cheating, Hermione had told her, was a sacred tradition when it came to the Triwizard Tournament. "Ladies first, eh?" Bagman said and opened the neck of the bag slightly before offering it to Fleur. She looked like she was on the verge of trying to quit, but she managed to slowly put her hand in and draw something out. It was a moving, miniature model of a Swedish short snout, with the number 1 around its neck. That was, Holly thought, quite an impressive bit of enchanting. Lucky girl, short snouts are big, but they're not all that bright. "Well, the last of our lady champions," then Bagman said, and offered Holly the bag. She hesitated for only a moment and withdrew her dragon. It was covered in spikes of bone, and she had to hold it by the tail to stop it from trying to breathe a miniature jet of fire at her. It had a little card around its neck that read "For Hungarian Horntail for you, Potter." "That's a nasty one," Mrs. Hull said, chuckling to herself. Holly tried very hard not to scowl at her. Cedric pulled out the Chinese fireball, whilst Victor Crumb drew the Welsh green. "Now, for your boons. You each have 1 for this task, and each will give you a very useful item for the task ahead. Each boon will come with a small card explaining how to use it, keep them secret, and keep them safe. Once I've given them to you, the boons are your responsibility. You may use them for this task, or save them for another," Bagman said. He passed out small stoppered glass vials with objects inside them. Both Fleur and Crumb got vials containing little silver discs, whilst Cedric's just looked like a gobstone. Holly's boon was what looked like an ordinary wizarding white queen chess piece. "Throw me at your foe, and I shall aid you with marble fist and stone blade," read the card. Holly could guess what the chess piece would do, and she carefully pocketed it and the vial. "Say, Holly my dear, could I have a word with you outside?" Bagman asked. Holly blinked, but she followed the portly department head out of the champion's tent. "What do you need, Mr. Bagman?" she asked. "Well, just wanted to see how you are." "Got a plan?" Bagman asked. "Sure, Sirius and Remus helped me with it," she said. "Excellent, excellent, but if you need anything, you just ask. A few pointers, maybe, or something discreet." "Nobody have to know," Bagman said, and Holly almost went for her wand. Why would Bagman want to help her cheat, she wondered. "I think I'll be fine, Mr. Bagman," Holly said. There was a note of tension in her voice, and Bagman seemed to get the message because he ran back inside the tent almost immediately. Holly followed him in after a few moments, and she saw Fleur leaving to go confront her dragon. There was silence in the tent as Fleur competed. They could all hear the sounds of a roaring dragon, smell the distinctive smell of dragon breath, and then the dragon seemed to calm. Another voice could be heard over it. This one was gentle and melodic. Fleur sang, and even here in the tent, Holly could feel the power in that melody. It was a little like Parseltongue, infusing magic into words at a more primal level than an incantation. The crowd roared, and Holly knew Fleur had just succeeded. Then in what seemed like no time at all, Cedric and Crumb had also gone and faced their dragon. Holly listened to Bagman's excited commentary, and she knew all the older champions had at least gotten the egg. Crumb had done something with a broom and apparently gotten singed, Cedric's attempt had involved a lot of spellfire, and Fleur had done something with a magical song to placate her dragon. Holly heard the whistle blow, signaling her to enter the stadium. She looked down at her hand and saw that it was perfectly still. Not a trace of a shake. There never was when her life was on the line. She grinned despite herself, drew her wand, and walked out into the stadium. She exited the heavy drapes of the tent's exit and entered a blasted hellscape. Barren grey rock, carved into a series of trenches and littered with bits of cover, slowly converged upwards. At the very top of the hill was a dragon exactly as big as Holly had been dreading it would be, sitting on a cluster of fake eggs and a single shining golden egg. The crowd roared as Bagman introduced her, but Holly knew she had no time to waste. The second the task began, she leapt out of cover. Out of the rocky trench and onto the open ground. Her wand moved lightning fast as the Horntail roared and breathed fire at her before she could cast her curses. Her shield charm split the flame down the middle, scorching the rocky walls of the stadium black. She was running forward as she kept up her shield, and then the Horntail's breath let up and Holly fired off a beam of pink light from her wand. And Potter's demonstrating incredible mastery of the shield charm, to be expected with her combat experience. Bagman said, his voice magical enhanced from his seat in the commentary box. The conjunctivitis curse hit the Horntail right in the eye, and it let out an awful screech as Holly's curse blinded it temporarily. Then her second curse hit the other eye, and the dragon reared back up on its hind legs, screeching in pain and confusion. Holly saw how unsteady it was on only its hind legs, and then she noted how the hill it was standing on and her angle towards it worked out. Exploso! Holly roared, her powerful blasting curse slamming into the dragon and sending it toppling backwards in a pulse of blue light. The dragon's thick hide was resistant to magic, but that wouldn't protect it from gravity, and the force of her blasting curse was enough to unbalance the dragon. Serpent Sorcerer, Holly said more calmly, and she summoned a dozen huge and dangerous-looking snakes. She hissed at them, giving their unliving magical constructs their orders, and then silenced herself. My word, she's blinded and toppled it. And what's this, summoning snakes? Wait, let's all be very quiet. Potter is attempting to use a stealthy approach, Bagman said, as Holly slowly snuck up the rocky hill in the center of the stadium. She had to be very careful, because whilst her silencing spell would stop her from making any noise, if she dislodged some rocks her spell would do nothing and the dragon would be alerted. From what Holly could hear, it was happily devouring the conjured snakes for the time being. Then, just as she crested the hill, she saw the Horntail's spiky snout turn in her direction and sniff loudly. Holly began to understand the flaw in her plan, and she knew that her summoned snakes weren't going to be able to distract the dragon long enough. The Horntail turned fully towards her, and Holly gulped. She wasn't even at the golden egg yet. Holly withdrew the vial with the chess piece from her robes and threw it towards the dragon as hard as she could. It shattered on the blasted rock in front of it, and then in a puff of smoke the White Queen from the chessboard guarding the Philosopher's Stone appeared. It socked the Horntail right in the jaw with a marble fist and then tried to put the dragon in a headlock. As the chess piece and the dragon grappled one another, Holly cancelled the spells on her and dashed forward. As the dragon finished smashing up the chess piece, Holly scooped up the golden egg and began to dash for the exit. The dragon turned and breathed fire at her, but Holly shielded herself against it. The fire went upwards and slammed into the wards designed to protect the audience, who screamed and cheered equally loudly. She ducked beneath the tail swipe, going into a desperate roll, but then Holly was safe and beyond the reach of the dragon. Dozens of handlers emerged and started to stun the dragon, and eventually, they got the dragon to agree to take another nap. Holly had survived the first task, and she eagerly turned towards the judges to see what she'd scored. Chapter 54, Year 4, Chapter 20. Chapter Text. I don't believe it, Potter's gone and faced the Horntail head-on, and she's won. Our youngest champion has just achieved our quickest victory of the day. Well, that's certain to shorten those long odds on her, Bagman said from the commentator's seat, talking into his enchanted and old-fashioned looking microphone. Dragon handlers, Charlie Weasley amongst them, rushed onto the rocky ground of the stadium. They fired huge coordinated barrages of stunning spells at the angry Horntail. It thrashed around and tried to break its chained collar, but the handlers had it knocked out with surprising speed. Holly clutched her golden egg, which was surprisingly large and heavy, in one hand, and her wand in the other. The crowd was cheering as one now, all house and school allegiances long since forgotten. Holly waved back at them, and she grinned broadly as she saw the giant animated lightning bolt banner the twins had made being madly waved. Hagrid, McGonagall, and Moody were all waiting for her at the other exit of the stadium, and even Moody looked a little happy. "You really did it. Even managed not to hurt the poor thing too badly," Hagrid said, the poor thing, of course, being the dragon that had just been trying to roast Holly alive. But she was in a good mood, and so she merely smiled at Hagrid and said nothing. "That was some good aim you showed out there," Potter Moody said, leaning on his cane. "Thanks, Professors," Holly said. "Excellently done, Miss Potter, with me, if you please. Madame Pomfrey wants a look at you, just to make sure you haven't hurt yourself," McGonagall said, and Holly followed her into a white tent. It was divided into small cubicles, and Holly thought she could make out the silhouette of Victor Krum in one of them. Holly sat down, and Madame Pomfrey soon arrived. She looked like she'd had a busy afternoon. "Dragons. Last year, Dementus, this year, dragons. If this keeps up, there'll be an undo for next year." "Oh, I suppose you're fine, Potter," Madame Pomfrey said as she looked Holly over. Just a moment afterwards, Hermione, Ginny, and Ron all burst into the tent. "Holly," they said, and Ginny ran over and hugged her. "I'm fine, look, not even singed," Holly said, as she joined her friends in returning to the stands. She could see the judges clearly now, and apparently, all that remained for the first task was for her score to be given out. It was pretty bloody scary, and I was just watching it," Ron said. "I'm sorry for forgetting about it tracking you by scent, Holly. I should have accounted for the dragon's strong sense," Hermione began, but Holly interrupted her. "It's okay, Hermione. If Sirius and Remus didn't think of it," Holly said. "You know, you said Professor Dumbledore was teaching you all about magical fire a few weeks ago. Reckon he was trying to get you ready for this?" Ginny asked. "I think that trying to guess why the headmaster does something is only going to lead to failure," Holly said, to a chorus of laughter. "Shush, they're announcing the scores," Ron said, and Holly turned to watch the judges intently. She'd been informed what the other champions had scored, and she hoped that she could at least not fall too far behind, or even, a small part of her whispered, build a bit of a lead. Madame Maxime raised her wand, and out of it shot a long silver ribbon. The ribbon twisted in midair until it became a floating number 9. People clapped here and there whilst Holly kept her gaze squarely on the judges. Mrs. Hull was the next judge, and she gave Holly an 8, though she didn't look at all happy about it. Holly wasn't sure what her problem was. The score was high enough not to anger the crowd, although Holly heard a few people muttering. Then Dumbledore gave her a 9, and Holly felt her hopes rise. Could she actually be a contender against people like Victor Krum and Fleur Delacour? When Ludo Bagman gave Holly a perfect 10, the entire stadium seemed to erupt with noise. Gryffindor House got to their feet as one and let out a massive, nearly defeating roar, whilst even the odd Slytherin or Hufflepuff started to clap. A 10, nobody else but Krum's got one, and that was from Karkaroff, Ron said excitedly. When Karkaroff gave Holly a 4, it seemed like every student in the stadium got to their feet to boo him. The Slytherins seemed to be mostly staying out of it, but even Hufflepuff, who had hated Holly for usurping Cedric, were standing and booing. "That's rubbish!" Ginny shouted, and Ron wasn't far behind her. Holly did some quick sums in her head, and she couldn't help but roll her eyes as she realized she and Krum would be exactly even with one another. "At least he didn't leave me 1 point behind Krum," Holly said. It was rubbish, but tying Victor Krum for first place wasn't anything she could complain about, and seeing the entire school cheer for her, all the animosity of the past weeks forgotten, had been a reward in and of itself. McGonagall came and retrieved Holly as people began to leave, and Holly rejoined the other champions, Bagman and Hull, in the first tent. Krum had one hand covered in bandages, but he didn't seem like he was in all that much pain or anything. Fleur looked much better now that the first task was over and done with, as did Cedric. "Good to see you all made it through the first task all right, got you eggs and all that," Bagman said a little awkwardly. Hull coughed loudly. Well, yes, let's not keep you too long, I'm sure there are parties waiting for you back up at the castle. The second task will take place at 9 in the morning of February the 24th, and if you'd examine the hinges on your eggs, you'll notice that they open up. Find a private palace to do that, and you'll have your clue for the next task, Bagman said. They all left the tent a little awkwardly, and Holly made sure to evade Rita Skeeter after she saw her prowling towards the champions. By the time she reached Gryffindor Tower, Fred and George had a party in full swing. The common room was filled with raucous noise, and someone handed Holly a butterbeer the second she entered. "Here she is," shouted Lee Jordan, and he let off a half-dozen tiny filibuster fireworks. They sparked and whizzed through the air, leaving behind smoke and little dancing bits of light. The huge animated banner that Holly had seen waving in the stands was now hung proudly up on the wall, and a large Triwizard scoreboard now occupied much of the notice board. "Excellent work out there, Potter. I always said a conjunctivitis curse to the eyes was a smart way to go about it," Cormac McLagan said, patting Holly on the pat with more than a little force. Thanks Cormac," Holly said, unsure what to say to the boy she regarded as an obnoxious twit. "Can we offer our conquering heroine anything this fine afternoon, more butterbeer, cake, a custard cream?" George said, holding out one of the desserts towards Holly. As she hadn't been born yesterday, Holly politely declined. Seamus Finnegan did take one, and he ended up spending a few minutes covered in white feathers. But they fell off quickly, and Seamus was laughing along with everyone else. The twins announced that they were selling them for 7 sickles each, and soon they were doing a roaring trade from a little table at the back of the room. Not just in canary creams either, they were selling skiving snack boxes, which were little sweets that made one a little ill, and fake wands hand over fist. The wands turned into something funny when someone tried to cast a spell with them. Holly saw the wands transform into everything from a haddock to a ladle. Holly went to go buy one from the twins, because they really were great fun, and the line around the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes table parted for her. "And what can we interest you in, young Miss Potter?" Fred said, doing a passable impression of Florian Fortescue, who was the proprietor of the ice cream parlor in Diagon Alley. "I'll take a fake wand and 2 scoops of wizard-raised chalk and mint, thanks, Florian," she said, and Fred laughed. She bought her fake wand, and had great fun waving it and turning it into various objects. She, Ron, and Ginny got into a sword fight with their fake wands, and so Holly had to block a fish with her rolling pin. Hermione didn't join in, but she was examining one of the fake wands closely. "This is really very good work," Hermione said to Fred and George as the party began to wind down. "I wouldn't have thought you'd have been interested in prank items," Hermione, George said. "I'm not. But you really have done something special with the runes here. I wasn't aware you could get them to produce a random function," Hermione said. "Oh ho, she knows what she's talking about. Tell you what, you come and give us some advice on some future products, and we'll tell you all how this one works," Fred said, grinning. "Very well," Hermione said, but Holly thought her sigh was mostly performative. That night, Holly put her little Horntail model onto her bedside table and went to sleep without so much as a trace of a nightmare. Hermione had a little collection of international wizarding newspapers the next morning, reading all about how other countries were reporting on the first task, though she could only read French and a little Spanish. The French papers were all excited about Fleur, and it had a big glossy photograph of her charming the dragon on the front page. Holly and Crumb were also mentioned, though Holly was described as overpowering her dragon with brutal curses and Crumb was called a one-note Quidditch player. Cedric wasn't mentioned much beyond his score. Most of the papers they could actually read were American, and the tournament seemed to be front-page news in most of them solely because of Holly and Crumb. Holly noted that quite a few of them made sure to inform their readers that she was a half-blood, and one even praised her for overcoming a Muggle upbringing. The other news stories were mostly on things like corruption in the Roanoke Regiment, or protests relating to issues Holly had no idea about. She realized that she didn't know all that much about the wider wizarding world. She knew a little, that in Europe, most magical governments were organized much like the Ministry here, for example, but she hadn't known that the American wizards had an entirely separate government, and indeed considered themselves a different country than Muggle America. Hermione had known that, of course, but Hermione read much more broadly than Holly. Holly was mostly interested in practical magic, or failing that, exciting and dangerous things, but Hermione was more than happy to read dry history texts and such. As November neared its end, Holly was kept very busy by all her commitments. She had more lessons with Dumbledore on protecting her mind, Quidditch practice, and keeping up with her extracurricular studies all on top of classes. She was also helping her friends with their animagus transfigurations, and after a few false starts with the sticking solution, it seemed like they would be ready to try it just after Christmas. Before that, Holly still had a lot to do. On the last weekend of November, the third-year dueling competition was held before the Hufflepuff Volchanova, one of Durmstrang's house teams, match. She knew the fourth-year competition wasn't far away, and she was determined to win it. "Miss Potter?" McGonagall asked loudly, and Holly flushed. "What was the question, Professor?" Holly asked. It was their last lesson on Thursday, and everyone was a little tired, but McGonagall didn't think that was a decent excuse. "Do try to stay awake in class in the future, Potter. Now, pay attention, because this is especially important for you. As you may have heard from older students, Hogwarts will be holding a Yule Ball this year, as it is a traditional part of the tournament," McGonagall began, and Holly felt panic rise within her. A ball, did that mean she'd have to take someone as a date? "And while the ball is open to fourth years and above, you may invite a younger student if you wish," McGonagall continued, and Holly felt her fears confirmed. This, she thought, was scarier than the dragon. At least if she'd failed at that, her humiliation would be over quickly. This promised to be far more drawn out. Chapter 55, Year 4, Chapter 21. Chapter Text. Holly heard whispers and giggles all around her, and as McGonagall talked she could feel almost all the eyes in the Transfiguration classroom turn to her. Holly just stared straight ahead and tried not to take any notice of them, because if she did that would open the floodgates and she'd never get out of the classroom without being mobbed. "Miss Potter." "Stay behind, please," McGonagall said, and Holly gulped. She was sure she wasn't going to like whatever McGonagall wanted to talk to her about. After everyone else had left, Holly joined her Transfiguration professor up in the front of the classroom. "What did you want to talk about, Professor?" Holly asked. "Just to inform you that the champions and their partners traditionally open the ball." "I imagine you can't dance?" McGonagall asked. "Definitely not at a ball," Holly said. "Well, it's really not especially hard, there will be lessons available. I would strongly suggest that you attend so that you do not embarrass the school by stepping on some poor boy's feet," McGonagall said, and Holly nodded. Do I have to take a boy?" she asked, nervously. "There are no rules against taking a girl, but—" "Potter, listen to me carefully. Whoever you take might find themselves put into a spotlight they are not ready for, and that would go doubly for any girl you happened to take," McGonagall said, carefully. I understand, Professor," Holly said, and she hurried off to get to her next class. All throughout the day the idea of who to take at her, not to mention that she was already fending off proposals from older boys, most of whom seemed to have been put up to it on a dare. She saw quite a few snickering mates throughout the day, at any rate. Holly was used to hearing the things they giggled about, and although it was embarrassing and hurtful her past experiences let her get through it with only minor emotional injury. "Hey, Potter!" Cormac McLaggen shouted from across the corridor. "What do you want, Cormac?" Holly asked, and she fought not to roll her eyes as she saw Cormac's buddies inexpertly hiding in a classroom across the hallway. "Just wanted to know if you'd got a date to the Yule Ball yet, you know. I've heard you're pretty popular with the lads this year," Cormac said. "I don't have one yet," no, Holly said, blushing. She could stand up to a roaring dragon, but talking about something like this with a handsome older boy, even one she disliked, was embarrassing. "Just my luck then, eh? I know a lot of guys are asking you on a dare, but I reckon you'd look pretty good in dress robes." "What do you reckon?" Cormac said, and Holly felt her hand twitch. "No thanks," she said, not looking at Cormac. "Come on, you're not gonna get a better offer, what? Do you think Cedric Diggory is gonna date a scrawny little?" Cormac began, but whatever he was going to call her was interrupted by Holly. "I said no, Cormac. Why you'd think I'd ever say yes is beyond me, but perhaps you haven't got the memo. I think you're an obnoxious ass, and never in a million years would I go to the Yule Ball with you," Holly said. "Fine, enjoy being alone or going with some fat ass like Longbottom, Cormac said, turning away from her. Don't talk about Neville like that, Holly said, and Cormac laughed. She drew her wand and hexed him, causing pimples to break out all across his face. Even his poorly concealed friends laughed at that, and Cormac rushed away from her. Holly stormed off, angry. She wanted to transform and go flying, but the school was too crowded for her to get away with that. So instead she walked out onto the bridge to brood, savoring the feel of the cold wind against her face. She had no idea who to ask to the Yule Ball, and that was even if they'd accept her. She thought she might be able to handle rejection, but if they said no because she was trans. Holly sat down against the wooden sides of the bridge and wondered. Who could she ask to go with her to the Yule Ball? She felt like she could admit she thought Cho Chang was very pretty, but did she even have any interest in girls? Holly had heard rumors about that, of course, but that was just a stereotype any girl who played Quidditch had to deal with. Then there was Cedric Diggory, who she knew liked girls, but he was several years above her. Would he even be interested? Would he, she wondered, think of her as a girl when it came to something like this? He hadn't said anything about doubting her, and he'd seemed embarrassed by his dad, but Holly knew there was a world of difference between accepting her as a friend who happened to be a girl and as a girlfriend. Beyond that, how could she get him to ask her? Surely he'd ask someone like Fleur, or another older girl, not someone like her. How could she compare to the Partvila girl? Screw it. I'll just have to ask him myself, Holly said to herself, standing up. Maybe he'd say no, and it would be awful, but at the end of the day, it would only be social mortification. She'd experienced that before, and she could do it again. She knew that tradition dictated that boys were supposed to ask girls to this sort of thing, but when had she ever bothered with respecting tradition? She didn't care if some stuffy witch writing into Witch Weekly would disapprove, someone would probably disapprove whatever she did. So Holly gathered up all her courage and went to find Cedric. After retrieving the map from her room, it was easy enough to track him down to the Owlery, and Holly was lucky enough to catch him alone there. All she had to do was go up and talk to him. A simple, easy task. Naturally, she found it incredibly difficult. What should she say, she wondered. She was so absorbed in trying to think up some perfect opening line that she actually managed to arrive at the Owlery without noticing. Holly? Cedric asked, and she looked up in surprise. There he was, as handsome as ever, tying a letter to the leg of an owl. Oh, hey there, Cedric, Holly said, blushing. Why had she just blundered in, thought. You here to send a letter too? Just writing to my dad. You saw how he was at the tournament, Cedric said, waving his arm in an embarrassed yet fond sort of way that Holly had only understood after she started living with Sirius and Remus. No, I was actually looking for you, she said, the words coming out in a great big tumble. Is it about the tournament? Listen, I've found, Cedric began, but Holly cut him off in her nervousness. No, not like that. I just wanted to ask you to go to the Yule Ball with me, Holly said, and she felt her cheeks turn crimson. This was mortifying, and he hadn't even answered yet. Then Holly saw Cedric's expression, and it was like she stepped through a vanishing stare. He didn't look happy, or interested, or even bemused. He looked sad and awkward. Even, some small part of her whispered, uncomfortable. He's going to tell you he couldn't dance with a boy, the part of her that had never really left Privet Drive whispered. He's going to tell you that you're not good enough, that you're an ugly little stick with nothing to speak of. I can't. I'm really sorry, you know. It's not about you being, what was the word? Trans. It's not about that. You're a good-looking girl, and whoever you go with will be lucky as all hell. But I'm dating someone already. Before the ball was even announced, Cedric said, and Holly felt a conflicting whirlwind of emotions. Relief, that he hadn't said something awful. Pain, because he'd been so nice and charming in letting her down gently, so that she liked him even more as he was saying no. Sheer, wild, absurd humor, because she'd worked herself up so much for something she'd never had a chance at in the first place. Oh, was all Holly said, quietly. Can you keep a secret? Cedric asked, and Holly nodded mutely. Cho and I are dating, you know how it is with the Quidditch rivalries in this school. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw aren't exactly Gryffindor and Slytherin, but, Cedric said, and Holly laughed. Of course he was dating the other person she'd wanted to ask. The whole thing felt like some mean joke the universe had played on her, and she couldn't help but laugh wildly. I'm sorry, Cedric, that wasn't about you. The other person, that I was considering asking was Cho, Holly said. He laughed too then, a little ruefully. Well, I can see you've got good taste. But you know, I'm sure you'll find someone you like. I guess I'm not too good at this, Cedric said, awkwardly. It's okay. I guess I'll go now. Holly said, and she turned to leave. Wait, Holly, Cedric said, and for one moment a surge of stupid, impossible hope surged through her. She stopped and turned back to face him. About the tournament. I didn't really say thank you for warning me about the dragons. Have you opened your egg yet? Cedric asked. Holly blinked. No, I haven't, Holly said. She'd been so busy that it had slipped her mind. Right, so be careful when you do, it makes a fucking awful noise. But it's not so bad if you take it with you when you have a bath. Just put the egg in the water with you and mull things over. You can use the prefect's bathroom if you want, fourth door to the left of that statue of Boris the Bewildered on the 5th floor. Passwords Pine Fresh, Cedric said, and Holly nodded slowly. Thanks I guess. Holly said, and before she could feel any worse she dashed out of the owlery. Even flying over the grounds transformed into a raven did nothing to soothe her upset feelings, and Holly soon returned to her dorm to sulk. It was patently, bizarrely unfair that Cho and Cedric were dating each other. It was awful and not fair at all. She sat on her bed with the curtains drawn closed and dried her tears. Who else could she go with? She didn't like anyone else, and she didn't want to go with some random boy. Especially not the type who'd been pushed into asking her by his laughing mates. Maybe going with one of her housemates would be okay, they were at least likely to be interested in her beyond her fame. Her bad mood persisted until the weekend, and she went down to the Quidditch match only because Ginny would be dueling beforehand. Maybe she could boo Hufflepuff, she thought. Holly hadn't talked to her friends about what had happened, but she knew they'd noticed her sudden change in mood. She hadn't talked to anyone about it, not wanting to betray Cedric's confidence or to embarrass herself further. The third-year dueling competition was substantially more exciting than the previous two, though, and Holly found herself enjoying it despite herself. People could finally actually defend themselves, and there was plenty of decent fencing with disarming charms, minor hexes, and basic deflections. People moved more, and nobody was very good at hitting people despite the short range. Holly knew from experience that accuracy when nobody was shooting spells at you was very different from when it actually counted. One kid from Durmstrang managed to bind his opponent in writhing coils of rope he transfigured, and the second-year winner won a bout before being disarmed. Then Ginny had her first duel, and Holly cheered just as loudly as Ron when Ginny managed to stun her opponent in one clean shot. She'd simply stood still and let the minor hex he cast sail right past her before she jabbed her wand at him and knocked him clean out. Ginny ended up going all the way to the final duel using an impressive combination of hex deflections, all the hexes and jinxes she'd picked up living in the burrow for 13 years, and her excellent stunning charm. She faced a boy from Durmstrang in the final, and they both had clearly mastered the stunning charm from their previous bouts. Holly thought that it might come down to speed, with both being able to cast a spell they wouldn't be able to block with simple hex deflection, but she was amazed when Ginny bounced the boy's stunner right off her shield charm. Holly was even more amazed when the boy shielded himself from his own deflected stunning spell. Ginny and the boy fought one another fiercely, both casting much faster than the other third years. Stunning spells, disarming charms, and all manner of hexes flew between them. In the end, Ginny was simply faster on her feet and on the cast than the boy. She drove him backwards, spell by spell until she sent him flying backwards with an especially powerful stunner. Professor Flitwick, who was coordinating the dueling, quickly had the boy back up on his feet. He didn't seem too upset about losing to Ginny, and the two of them shook hands amicably as all the Hogwarts students cheered. Holly even enjoyed watching the Quidditch match, and she managed to restrain herself from booing Hufflepuff. That probably would have been both uncalled for and a dumb move in the current climate. Cedric caught the snitch in a daring dive, and Holly clapped. but only a little. As Holly and her friends were walking back to the castle, she talked to Ginny about her duels. "That was really well fought, Ginny," Holly said. "It had been a great performance, especially for a third year. She'd used owl-level magic, and more than a little cunning, to pull out Hogwarts' first victory in the dueling." Thanks, Holly," Ginny said, blushing, and suddenly Holly felt very stupid. There was a very pretty girl at Hogwarts who she knew liked girls, and who really knew her. Who made her feel safe, in a way very few people did. Who could understand why sometimes her hands shook and why she so often woke from nightmares. "Can I talk to you?" Holly asked Ginny as they neared the castle. Ron and Hermione were busy having one of their fun arguments and were completely involved in it. "Sure," Ginny said, sounding a little puzzled. Holly looked around to make sure they were alone, and then she gathered up all the courage she could find, then she found a little extra under a pillow. Would you like to go to the Yule Ball with me?" she asked, and hoped that she really wasn't going to have to do this a third time. Chapter 56, Year 4, Chapter 22. Chapter Text. Yes, I'd like to go to the ball with you," Ginny said, the biggest smile Holly could ever remember seeing on her face. Is this as friends, or?" Ginny said, a little awkwardly. Holly felt a little stab of worry at Frides, but she calmed down. She knew what Ginny was saying. "Not as friends," Holly said, simply, and Ginny smiled even more. Then she hugged Holly. It wasn't really any different to any of the hugs Ginny had given her before, but they were both suddenly nervous and awkward. Slowly, deliberately, Holly took Ginny's hand in her own. They walked back to the castle, not really saying much that mattered. The grounds were not yet covered with the snow that Hogwarts seemed to get every year around Christmas, but there was a beauty to their winter starkness. Everyone in Holly's year suddenly seemed to be in a frenzy about relationships and dating, even beyond the ball. It was as if some great store of bent-up romantic explosives had blown up all at once. The older students were even more hurried, with those not already paired off scrambling to find dates to the Yule Ball. Holly and Ginny hadn't told anyone who they were going with, but Holly had let it slip that she was going with someone. A few people still asked, but as the rumor spread around, the torrent of proposals dried up a little. "You know, Holly, you're a girl," Ron said one rainy afternoon in the common room, perhaps a week into December. "Thank you for noticing, Ron," Holly said, while Ginny giggled. Hermione just concentrated on the chessboard. She and Ron were playing a game, and even Holly could tell Hermione was probably going to lose. Again. It's just, how do I ask a girl to the Yule Ball? You always seem to travel in packs, and it's bloody intimidating, Ron said. It's not going to be the end of the world if she says no, Ron. We only laughed at you for a few days after you tried to ask Fleur, Holly said. Well, I wasn't in my right mind for that, was I? What if I go ask some girl when I'm fully myself and make just as big an ass out of myself, Ron said, nervously. Are you a Gryffindor or not? Ginny cut in. Fine. I'll go ask her right now. Why do you care, anyway? It's not like you're going, Ron said. For your information, Ronald, someone asked me more than a week ago, and I said yes, Ginny said, crossing her arms. What, who are you going with? Ron spluttered. I'm not going to tell you, Ginny said. Why not? Ron said. Because you'd glare at whatever poor boy asked her for the whole month, Hermione said, and Holly winced. She was glad Ron wasn't looking at her, but she saw Hermione's eyes narrow slightly. Fine then. I bet it's some really ugly bloke. Watch the board. Ron shouted as Ginny threw a cushion at him. And I bet you end up going alone, you prat, Ginny said. Hermione, want to go to the Yule Ball with me? Ron asked, very casually. Someone's already asked me. And I wouldn't say yes to something you're clearly doing just to get one over on your sister anyway, Hermione said. That was news to Holly and Ginny, and Holly was surprised Hermione hadn't told her, at least. That night, Dumbledore had another lesson for Holly. She arrived at his office curious what she'd be learning this time, because he had told her at the end of their last occlumency lesson that she'd be learning something practical this time. It's good to see you, Holly, Dumbledore said as she entered his office. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to her. Good to see you too, Professor. What am I learning tonight? Holly asked. As we learnt about fire in the last of these practical lessons, today we shall learn about water. If you would take my arm. Dumbledore responded, holding out his arm. Holly took it, and then she felt like she was being squeezed through a tube of toothpaste and spun around in a washing machine all at once. Then it was over, and Holly steadied herself on the tiled wall of a deserted Muggle indoor swimming pool. She looked around in confusion and saw that she really was standing by the side of a Muggle pool. Nobody else was around, and she could see that the doors were locked. Where are we, Professor? Holly asked. Well, we will require a sizable body of water tonight, and this water is at least heated, unlike the Black Lake, Dumbledore said. That makes sense, I guess, Holly said. Indeed. If one were to get into the Black Lake at this time of year, a good warming charm would be rather crucial. Where wizards and witches often call upon fire to destroy, water is most often used to defend against magic. Anti-apparition wards anchored by a perimeter of water are much stronger, for example, Dumbledore said, and Holly blinked. Like a moat on a castle? Holly asked. Literally, in many cases. Water is one of the most effective naturally occurring barriers to magic, certainly one of the most effective that is in any way common. Spells struggle to go through a good quantity of it, and many offensive spells will simply detonate on the surface, including even powerful dark curses like the Killing Curse, Dumbledore said. Really? Then why don't wizards just defend themselves with conjured water? Holly asked. Aguamenti is an involved, time-consuming spell, and most other methods are similarly too slow to be of much use. But, much as summoned furniture and debris are used to stop the Killing Curse, so is existing water. A rule of thumb that will serve you well, Holly, is that it is faster to manipulate than to conjure. Like so, Dumbledore said, and proceeded to demonstrate how much faster he could form the water in the pool into a barrier than the water he had to conjure himself. The conjured water was far too slow to be useful, but Dumbledore was seriously quick on the draw when it came to manipulating existing water. He had her fire a few spells at him, and he was able to deflect them all with water, but her disarming spell and stunning spells went right through the water. She hadn't hit him, of course, but her eyes still widened. And that is the other reason more wizards do not use water to defend themselves against others. However, should you find yourself facing a dark wizard or witch fond of powerful curses, it can prove to be a handy skill indeed. This property of water, that of making many curses detonate on contact, means that witches and wizards sometimes secure things underwater. Without such powerful tools, the magical creatures and dark beasts that live in the depths can prove formidable foes even for a powerful wizard, Dumbledore said. Well, you know, so is breathing underwater, Holly said. Not at all, my dear girl. A witch like yourself has many ways to breathe underwater, from a bubblehead charm to gillyweed to self-transfiguration. There are enough methods to suit any taste. Let us examine the bubblehead charm, though, as it is by far the most practical, Dumbledore said. Holly practiced her bubblehead charm by sticking her head in the pool, which was great fun. Dumbledore did it with her, and Holly nearly laughed herself silly at the extra long bubble he made to accommodate his beard. Then she applied a flame-freezing charm on herself and practiced using the water in the pool to defend against Dumbledore's spells, just a simple bolt of fire, but it behaved much like a deadly curse when it hit the water. She took quite a few tries to get it right and felt the bizarre cooling sensation of the flames splashing over her more than once, but by the time she apparated back to Hogwarts she'd gotten pretty good at blocking Dumbledore's spells with the water. As she walked back to Gryffindor Tower, she decided that she had put it off long enough. She ducked into her dorm room to get her cloak, the golden egg, and the Marauder's map, then she made her way to the prefect's bathroom under her cloak. She double-checked that there was no one in there, and she was very glad she did so when she saw the so-called bathroom for the first time. Everything was made out of white marble, and the bath was the size of a regular swimming pool, only circular. There was a large central column that went all the way to the vaulted ceiling, and what had to be hundreds of taps jutted out from every inch of its surface at the waterline. As she took in the lovely soft lightning from the chandelier full of candles, scented, she noticed, Holly numbly turned the taps. This was a far cry from the simple showers in Gryffindor Towers. She suddenly had a very great desire to become a prefect next year, simply so she could use this bathroom. She'd patrol all the corridors Dumbledore and McGonagall wanted just to get regular access to this. Holly, a girl said, and Holly whipped around. She'd double-checked. Myrtle? Holly asked, shocked. What was she doing here, Holly wondered. I come here after all the students have gone to bed. It's really quite lovely, isn't it? Myrtle said. Yeah, it's something else, all right, Holly said, very glad she was still dressed. Oh, are you here to listen to your egg too? Myrtle said, pointing to the golden egg Holly had laid on the floor. Yeah, what do you mean, too? Oh, Cedric comes here to swim at night sometimes. He's ever so kind to me, and the muscles don't hurt. His bathing costume is so conservative, though. Ugh, Myrtle said. Holly didn't really want to think about that any further. Thinking quickly, she put her things far away from the water and transfigured her uniform into the sort of swimming costume the girls in her swimming classes at primary school had worn. She wasn't really sure what witches wore in situations like these, though it couldn't be too different, although she didn't think wizards had invented the sort of artificial fabrics muggles used. After she saw herself in the mirror and felt a flash of shame and disgust, she quickly added one of those little skirts some muggle swimming costumes had. That was better, she thought. Then, as the water had filled up and had all sorts of bizarre bubbles and colors, she jumped into the egregiously large bath with a high-spirited giggle. After she'd had all sorts of fun confirming that while she could swim, she wasn't very good at it, she plucked her wand and the egg from the edge of the bath. She cast the bubblehead charm, and then sat on the bottom of the bath, which was deep enough that her feet didn't reach the bottom, with the egg. Carefully, she opened it up. She winced as she did so, prepared for the wail Cedric had mentioned, but instead, she heard a chorus of melodic voices sing. Come seek us where our voices sound. We cannot sing above the ground. And while you're searching, ponder this. We've taken what you'll sorely miss. An hour long you'll have to look. And to recover what we took. But past an hour, the weight's around your neck. Too late, in the third you'll be at the back. Oh, I wonder what the mer people are gonna do to you if you lose, Myrtle said. She, of course, could talk just as well underwater as above it. Holly dismissed her charm and broke the surface of the water, only to be assaulted by the whale Cedric had mentioned. She quickly closed the egg and put it back on the side of the bath. Mer people? Holly asked. That was Mermish we just heard. What? I was in Ravenclaw, you know, Myrtle said. What are they gonna do, build a huge tank and put a bunch of mer people in it? Holly asked. No, silly, where our voices sound means the Black Lake. You do know that a clan of mer people live there, right? Myrtle asked. Oh, Holly said. So she'd just need to find a village of mer people in the depths of the Black Lake and avoid being eaten by the giant squid and whatever else lived in there. Simple. Chapter 57, Year 4, Chapter 23. Chapter text. So that's the task, find something at the bottom of the Black Lake, get it back from the mer people, and make it to the starting point again in an hour, Holly said, the next morning. Sirius and Remus were looking at her through the two-way mirror with remarkably similar looks of concern. And Dumbledore taught you the bubblehead charm? Sirius said, grinning a little. That old cheat. We never could get one over him back when we were at school, he continued. How's your swimming? Remus asked. Not great, but I've been practicing, Holly said. She'd spent some time after talking to Myrtle practicing her swimming in the prefect's bathroom. She'd probably want to practice in the lake itself once she got good enough at warming charms, though. There are a lot of nasty things in that lake, Holly Sirius said. You should be fairly prepared, based on how well you did last year. Spells like Relasho will work on anything they'll have you face down there. Remember that stunning and disarming charms will both go a fair way through water, too, Remus said, and Holly nodded. So, got a date to the ball yet? Sirius asked, a mischievous fire in his eyes. I might, Holly said. Who's the lucky boy, or lady? Sirius asked. Holly blushed and looked around to make sure no one was listening in, then she leant forwards. Ginny Weasley, Holly whispered. Pay up, Sirius, Remus said, grinning. You had a bet on who I'd go with. Holly sputtered. Well, more of a friendly wager. Look, there's the delivery elf now, Sirius said, getting up. Holly laughed despite herself. The entire school got more and more excited as the end of term approached and the Christmas decorations began to appear. Hagrid carried in huge trees, and the entire staff seemed to have gone all out in decorating to impress their foreign guests. The 12 trees that lined the Great Hall had all sorts of enchanted decorations, including a number of life-size, animated golden owls. Enchanted, everlasting icicles decorated the staircases just as the first signs of snow began to appear. Hogwarts was, as Holly understood it, more prone to severe weather due to all the natural magic converging towards it. Sitting on such a large nexus of ley lines, the very air was charged with magic in a way that was very rare even in the wizarding world. Holly enjoyed beating one of the Durmstrang teams at Quidditch on the second to last weekend of term. Victor Crumb, watching from the stands, had even called her flying skilled, which, coming from the terse Quidditch prodigy, amounted to incredible. She made sure to practice her swimming in the dead of night in the prefect's bathroom, and then once Sirius had sent her a Muggle swimming costume of the correct design, she set to work on it. Hermione and Ron managed to, between them, get the warming runes working well enough that Holly could have practiced her swimming in the lake if it hadn't been frozen over. The little red stitched runes glowed softly, but there were no rules against enchanted swimwear in the second task. Holly had checked the official tournament rules. Said rules were contained in a book roughly Holly's size and contained a vast number of very specific possible offenses. Holly was sure that all of them had happened at some point, and she was amazed to see that there were multiple rules preventing any possible formal duel between the judges and the champions. Some of her teachers seemed to have given up on getting any actual work done in the last week of term, but others had doubled down even harder. Professors Moody and McGonagall assigned even more homework and had even more demanding lessons. Holly thought she'd written more essays on bloodline curses and parchment to plate transfigurations than anyone should in a week. Found someone to go with you to the ball yet? Ginny asked that Friday evening, as Ron walked back into the common room. As a matter of fact, I have, Ron said smugly. Well, who is it? Did you end up with Eloise Midgen? Ginny asked. As if I'm going to tell you lot. See how you like being left in the dark for a change, Ron said. Holly rolled her eyes. So, Holly, are you going to compete in the dueling competition? Hermione asked. I guess, champions are allowed to, and it sounds like fun, Holly said. What about you, Hermione? I reckon we could all do pretty well, Ron said. It would be interesting to see how good I am at it practice, and hopefully if enough of us enter, one of us will get to beat Malfoy, Hermione said, and they all laughed. On the last weekend of term, there was no Quidditch match scheduled, and that was a good thing because it was pouring down rain. There was the next step of the dueling competition, however, and so Holly went down to the Great Hall on Saturday afternoon to find the usual tables gone. Instead, they had been replaced with a setup much as the dueling club had used. There was a long, raised rectangular platform covered in a purple cloth, with steps leading up from both ends and cushions array around it. People were already gathering in huge numbers in the wooden stands lining the edge of the hall. Holly could guess why people had still turned up to watch despite it not being before a Quidditch game, but she didn't really mind, at least she'd be doing something she was actually good at. It wasn't that she hated the public attention, but she wanted it to be for something she did, like Quidditch, and not simply because she was famous. There were more unfamiliar Durmstrang and Beauxbatons students in the competitors area, and Holly grinned as she saw both Draco Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson waiting there. Sending either of them flying off the stage in front of the whole school would make this a day she looked back on fondly. Ah, Miss Potter, you are going to be entering, a girl in a Durmstrang uniform asked her. Her voice was accented, and Holly thought she might be German. She was tall for her age, fair-haired, and handsome in a sort of severe way. I am. Nice to meet you. Holly said as she held out her hand to the girl. Emmeline Klossner. It is good to meet you because I have heard so much about you. Most of my classmates, and even those of my age in the internationals, are not much of a challenge, but you are renowned. I am eager to see if you live up to the legends, Emmeline said. I'll give it my best shot, I suppose, Holly said awkwardly. She thought Emmeline was a little full of herself, but she was very good looking and Holly wanted deeply to impress her. Everyone here? Good, let's get started. Miss Weasley against Mr. Finch Fletchley, I think Flitwick said from his position of the side of the stage. Good luck, Ginny, Holly said softly. Ginny trounced Justin Finch Fletchley, blowing right through his weak shield charm with her stunning spell. Ron and Hermione also won their first matches, as did Draco Malfoy. Holly's eyes narrowed as she saw his form. It was very formal but very good. He looked like he'd had some rather expensive training over the summer. Then it was Holly's turn, and she walked up the steps to the platform to face Pansy Parkinson. This, she thought, would be great fun. Pansy didn't exactly look eager to duel the girl who fought a dragon, but she did take her place without wavering. Now, let's have a clean duel, you two. 3, 2, 1, start. Flitwick counted down, and Holly felt herself settle into an almost casual stance. She had half a mind to just pelt Pansy with hexes and jinxes for 10 minutes, but that sort of thing was against the rules. If she extended the duel just to humiliate her opponent, she'd be disqualified. So instead Holly simply raised her wand with frightening speed and disarmed Pansy before the other girl even had a chance to finish raising her wand, let alone speak. People cheered in the stands, although they seemed disappointed that Holly had ended it so quickly. In the second round, Ginny was matched up against Emmeline. The two girls took their positions, bowed, and then launched into a furious bout. Unlike the mostly one-sided affairs of the previous round, this duel was intense and drawn out. Ginny cast every spell she knew that was allowed in a duel like this with frightening speed, and Emmeline matched her spell for spell. Darts of light splashed against shield charms, hexes went flying wildly into the dueling wards surrounding the stage, and for a moment it seemed like both of them were evenly matched. Then Emmeline seemed to move even faster, and she disarmed Ginny with a silent disarming charm. HMPHH. I expected better from the champion of the previous year, Emmeline said, and threw Ginny's wand back to her contemptuously. Holly glared at her, good looking or not. Now she wanted to turn the German girl into a smear on the ground. Hermione and Ron were matched against one another, then, and Holly felt very conflicted as to who to root for. They were almost evenly matched, Ron's greater speed and accuracy making up for Hermione's much greater spell knowledge. A lucky hit gave Hermione the win, and the two of them walked off the stage without any hard feelings. You did very well, Ron, Hermione said as the two of them rejoined Holly and Ginny. Just don't lose next round, Ron said, slightly awkwardly. Holly had another easy victory over a boy from Beauxbatons, her stunning spell lifting him clean of his feet. She revived him and helped him up, and he didn't seem to take the loss too badly. She chatted with him for a while after, learning all about Beauxbatons and how defense was taught there. Miss Potter, Mr. Malfoy to start the third round, Flitwick said, drawing their names on little strips of parchment from a hat. Holly grinned, eager to get one over on Malfoy, but she paused when she saw him. He seemed nervous and not at all his usual confident self. He took his polished formal stance, and Holly saw the desperation in his eyes. At Flitwick's start both Holly and Malfoy burst into action. Her disarming spell slammed into his jinx in midair, and they exploded in a shower of sparkling light. Holly was in constant, fluid motion, her wand movements flowing smoothly from one spell to the next without any reset or interruption. Malfoy was crisp, formal, and far better than he had been. The two of them spent a few moments on the dance of spell and counterspell, jets of light being deflected off their shimmering shield charms in such number that it looked like the Weasley twins had set off a firework in the Great Hall. Holly was slightly faster than Malfoy, her more fluid form and better reflexes giving her the slightest edge in speed, but Malfoy, who'd clearly had training just for duels like this, had practiced with the restricted spell selection of sporting dueling. Holly, whose experience was almost all in combative dueling, was finding her inability to fling powerful curses at Malfoy limiting. He cast another spell, but this was a transfiguration, and two wooden hands burst from the stage to grab at Malfoy. He turned his wand to blast at them, and Holly grinned. Stupefy, she shouted, putting all the power she could into the spell. Malfoy whirled to defend himself, but he only had time for a basic deflection, not a full shield charm. Holly's stunning spell cut through the weak barrier without so much as slowing down, and it slammed into Malfoy. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying backwards from the sheer force of the spell, landing in a crumpled heap near the end of the stage. Holly revived him and, in the spirit of sportsmanship, offered him help to get to his feet. Malfoy refused it and said nothing as he walked away. All the Gryffindors in the crowd cheered Holly, and then everyone but the Slytherins joined in, especially those of the right age to have been picked on by Malfoy. She saw he was actually struggling to hold back tears. She felt bad looking at him because she could clearly see that he was very upset about losing to her. Then she dismissed that. What did she care if she'd ruined Malfoy's dreams? Hermione lost to Emmeline much quicker than Ginny had, and so Holly knew that there was only one possible match for the final round, her versus Emmeline. That, she thought, would be fun. Challenging, but fun. Chapter 58, Year 4, Chapter 24. Chapter text. Emmeline stood stock still, her wand down and her right foot slightly extended. She held her left arm behind her back and turned her torso to present a smaller target. Her face seemed to hold no expression at all, an emotionless mask and two cold, blue eyes staring out. Holly stood in a stance as careful as Emmeline's, though less rigid. She felt her heart beat faster and faster as Flitwick counted down, and she knew that she had to win. She couldn't let what Emmeline had said to Ginny go unanswered. Start. Flitwick announced, and both duelists sprung into motion with incredible speed. Holly cast a wordless disarming charm, whilst Emmeline went for a wordless stunning spell. The two jets of light collided in midair and exploded, but neither duelist could pay much attention to the shower of sparks, for more spells were already in the air. Holly flowed from one spell to the next, not leaving any wasted movement, resetting her wand to the neutral position. She cast a verbal stunning spell of such power that Emmeline had to use a verbal shield charm to deflect it, but then the German girl's more sport-oriented training began to show. Emmeline was just as fast as Holly, and as she recovered from the shield charm she managed to force Holly onto the defensive. Emmeline's spellfire wasn't strong enough to batter through Holly's shields, and Holly didn't risk attacking. Instead, she held out behind her shield charm for a few seconds and watched Emmeline's movements. Like Holly, she flowed from spell to spell without returning to the neutral position, but unlike Holly, there was a stiffness to her movements. They were crisp and well executed, but there was something off. And then Holly realized what it was. Emmeline had clearly practiced sequences of spells together rather than learning, as Holly had, to do it with any spell that would fit. Holly grinned just a little, and she knew now how she'd win. At such a short distance in the open, dodging accurately cast spells was almost impossible. The ordinary adult witch or wizard would probably miss most of the spells they cast even from the short range of a sporting duel, but both Holly and Emmeline were well-trained, experienced duelists. They knew how to keep their cool under spellfire, even, in Holly's case, lethal spellfire. At 10 paces, neither of them would miss. Emmeline paused for the briefest moment and began a sequence Holly had seen before. She shielded against the disarming charm and the stunning spell, but when the bodybind curse flew towards her, Holly did not shield herself. Instead, she stepped to the side. She knew what spell Emmeline would cast, where she'd cast it from, and Holly had moved before Emmeline had even finished the wand movement. The bodybind spell flew past Holly with only an inch or two to spare, but that was enough as she cast an nonverbal disarming charm with nearly superhuman speed. Emmeline simply couldn't move her wand to shield herself in time. Holly had picked the perfect moment, and she had started to cast her spell even as the jet of violet light from the bodybind curse had been flying at her. Holly's disarming charm hit Emmeline square in the chest, sending her flying backwards as Holly neatly plucked her wand from the air. Impossible to dodge at such short range, Emmeline said from the ground. Holly dearly wanted to say something catty and mean, but she knew that it probably wouldn't be wise. She'd just have to settle for the look of shock that was still on Emmeline's face as she shakily stood back up. And with that, Miss Potter has won the 4th-year competition. Congratulations to all who competed. Which champion will receive your boon, Miss Potter? Flitwick asked. I think I'll give it to myself, thanks, she said, and even the Hufflepuffs in the audience laughed. You did well, Holly said, holding out her hand to Emmeline. She reluctantly shook it. Not well enough. I think it is a good thing that you are too busy to be a sporting duelist, so I shall hope you play Quidditch for England one day, Emmeline said. Her friends from Durmstrang who had also competed then consoled her, and Flitwick followed Holly as she walked off the stage. That was very well done, Miss Potter, very well done. You caught her pattern, I'm assuming? Flitwick asked. Yes, Professor, Holly said. I thought you had, but still, to sidestep like that at 10 paces, there are very few duelists who could have done that, Flitwick said, before wandering off. That was incredible, Mate Ron said. I'm glad you beat her. Imagine how smug she'd have been if she won, Ginny said. Even Professor Flitwick seemed impressed. He was a champion duelist, you know, Hermione said, and Holly spent the day basking in her victory. They had an enormous amount of homework over the winter holiday, but Holly didn't let that dampen her good spirits. She and Hermione managed to get Ron and Ginny to finish their homework relatively early into the break, and so they were able to enjoy the week leading up to Christmas essentially unburdened by homework. Fred and George had sold enough canary creams that the sight of someone suddenly bursting into feathers was now routine at Hogwarts, and everyone was on their guard when being offered food. People had gotten very good at concealing canary creams into other foods, and Holly was sure not to accept so much as a crisp from the twins. Snow had arrived at Hogwarts, and Holly had great fun in endless snowball fights. Everywhere in the castle,